Shake it like you bake it, like you. Namaste. How you all doing? Hope you guys are rising and shining and having an absolutely great day. Sending big love to all of you. And welcome, Howard. I see you in the space, in the zone. And while a few people are sort of arriving, I think we're on our usual time slot, 3 minutes past the hour. It's normally 3 or 4 minutes past the hour, sometimes 5 or 6. So we've got the usual agreesome, threesome, little bit of a kind of climb some treesome crew of usuals here. Namaste, Edward. I hope you're good. Hope you're well. Big love to you. And we're going to be looking at, Jacob's ladder of spiritual ascension. Two sides to the conversation. Pre and post. And absolutely well, Howard. Can't complain, hey? Can't complain. Okay. Going to have to get an electrician to come into the house on Monday. But it's okay, because the roof guy finished fixing the roof on Friday. So that was good. Yay, no more leaky roof. Now, the geezer's not working, so there's no hot water. So I had a delightful cold shower. But it's okay, because it's still winter here. So put your hands in the air like you just don't care. And so wonderful, fresh, cold shower. And I managed to coerce my little 9-year-old, he's 9 now, into having a cold shower too. I said to him, well, I'll tell you what, when you're done with your cold shower, you get to play Minecraft, but not before. So there we go. Otherwise, life is good. Thanks for asking, Howard. So let's introduce the players on the table today. We've got, and I'll just go around the table clockwise. We've got Indy Sage, and Indy is, well, he's many things, apart from being someone who has survived a satanic cult. He's got a lot of experience, and he wasn't in the cult. He was abducted by the cult. There's the difference. He wasn't one of them, like, put your hands in the air like you really don't care kind of guys. But he's also an anthropologist. He's got a lot of experience in different realms of study and practice as well. Very much in tune with nature and the shamanic path, as well as Taoism and Western occult therapeutics. Being a Virgo, he loves to dip his nose into all the different pools of awareness and knowledge. But he's lovely, lovely gentleman, dear Indy Sage, and he's our proverbial chick puller here. You've got to have a chick puller on the stage. We managed to convince him to not wear his shirt today. Eye candy for the girls. You're going to see that chat room is going to be busy. So, but he's not a player, not in that way. We've also got dear Cosmic here. Cosmic is our also very interesting character, just like Indy Sage. Also, touched foot into a lot of different proverbial ponds. Namaste, Vincent. How you doing? And know thy enemy. Is Pope not on dope today? Hope you're well. Hope you're thriving. Hope everybody's good. So Cosmic is sort of like he's a channel. So he channels the Fae, and he has a relationship that he's been working for the last few years, where he's channeling a system of correspondences and language and occult therapeutics, occult knowledge, if you will, using the Fae's experience and perception to boost his own ideas. So yeah, that's the threesome on at the moment. Welcome to you, dear brothers. It's an honor to be here with you guys as always. And do please say a few words. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. So blessed to be here. Thank you, Franklin, for the great introduction. It should be a great discussion today. I always like an open discussion, and there's always a lot on the table as far as things that are coming up in the mystical and mythological and magical news that comes around that's been more prevalent now as we have this great awakening happening around the world. And some of us are not able to see it, and some of us are. And I like to use the butterfly analogy that was well said by Bruce Lipton, in this sense that we're in a kind of a cocoon right now in civilization. It's going through transformations, and it's going to have to, because the old ways are kind of collapsing down. And so a lot of the folks that are stuck with the old ways don't really see any positive hope towards a future or any transformation towards anything good. So it's very difficult for many of them to see this. But for those that follow what's called the imaginal cells in the cocoon of a butterfly through the chrysalis stage, the imaginal cells are the ones that lead the way to the new creation. And so some of us here have that kind of inspiration within us, and we've carried on these teachings and our life lessons that we've learned, and the practices that we've had have brought us wisdom through putting it into work and taking steps towards making our dreams a reality. So I feel like we're all part of creating this beautiful butterfly that's arising from this kind of lost cocoon that's kind of sitting on the wayside right now, wondering where we're going to be going. And I see that Mother Nature is kind of pushing things along as we kind of transform. Mother Nature is kind of urging us to kind of listen. And there's a lot of things going on as far as that goes on. We have tectonic activity, volcanoes, tsunamis, transient luminous events, DLEs. A lot of people have seen this red lightning, sprites that goes up from the clouds, and the blue lightning, and all this cool stuff that's been happening with the atmosphere right now. It's quite fascinating, and I feel like it's just a sign of things to come. I feel like with the electric universe theory, by I think David Talbot, I could be getting that name wrong, but he suggests that there goes through ages, when we get in closer proximity to Sirius, we have more arcing and electrical activity in the atmosphere, which could kind of change things up a little bit and give us different technologies to use and put into practice to create things like the ancients may have done in the past. So it'd be really interesting to see how this all unfolds. And I'm always curious to see people's interpretations of things. So it'd be fun to have a kind of an open discussion today, and I'm glad to be here.
Hey, what's up, guys? Cosmic Prankster here. So as Franklin mentioned, I work with the Fae, and last night in one of my channeling sessions, the main Fae that teaches me this stuff, her name is Slazithia, dropped a pretty big bombshell on me last night that really kind of changed my perception of the universe. And it's kind of an interesting thought, because normally in most like occult systems, when it comes to magical colors, like take the chakras, for example, like you got your red, your orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, right? But with the Fae, they add an additional color. They add pink on top of that, making it 8 colors instead of 7. And what I've found is interesting, Sliz kind of like threw me through a loop. It just made me like, I have to like look at this thing in a whole different way. It's like, we all assume that red is the first color of the spectrum, but she basically kind of told me, it's like, if you want to go to a different Zarfex, you have to, it's like, you can't assume that red is the first color. That's basically how the colors and energies are aligned in your dimension. But in other dimensions, orange might be the first color on the spectrum, and then red is the last color on the spectrum. So it's like you take a wheel of 8 and you kind of like move it, and you kind of move it up one notch, like you're kind of rotated around in a circle. And what this does is, when I think about colors, is instead of thinking of them like as a tower where it's like red is at the bottom and then magenta or violet is at the top, Now I see it as a wheel, and you can spin that wheel to any kind of configuration you want and have it start with any color. And the idea is whatever color you start with, that determines the new type of dimension, because in a way, the colors are still ordered the same in the same sequence. So yellow still precedes orange and green still precedes yellow, but it starts in a different way. So an analogy for this would be like a musical mode, right? So with like you think of like C major, for example, a C major scale would on the piano would be all the white keys going from C4 to C5. Now, if you want to do a musical mode, you have all the same white keys, but in the next instance, you might start with like D or E and then end on D or E. And that's kind of what I figured out with like these like, you know, mystical colors and stuff like that, that there's like, in the same way there's different musical modes, there's also different magical modes, if you will. In the same way you have like your Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Mixolydian. I think that when you rearrange the colors to start with a different one, it's kind of like that. So I've been really kind of reeling on this like discovery this morning, just like thinking about all the and pontificating on it a lot. But yeah, let's get this conversation started.
I really like that. And for those of you that may have followed it, I did share a, what do you call that place where you write articles? I don't normally write articles. I find the writing of articles to be butt pain. Excuse my French.
Substack?
Sorry?
Substack?
What was that?
Was it Substack you're talking about?
Yes, I wrote an article on Substack about the colors and about how we've been duped into this rainbow color system, and that like actually it's a lot more complex than that, and that there's different color systems that apply even here on physicality. Depends on which aspect of reality you're focusing, because this is like a convergence point, like the way I see Earth, you know, this physical reality. It's a convergence point where a lot of different dimensions converge, and then from there they expand outwards, like as a multiplicity would. So like that's a really interesting point. You know, I always take offense when I see that violet red color wheel, and I think like red, the reason we've put so much stock in red is because of red's association with C as the musical note C in the cleft scale of musical tone. So the classical musicians used to associate red with C. So red was considered the beginning of and C was always your, you know, your bass clef for any musical writings, you know. So that's like an interesting point. And I think because C relates to and red relates to Aries, it just happens to be April, right? March, April. But there's like might be spring on one part of the earth, right? But on another part of the earth, that's autumn. So it's very perspective driven, isn't it? Like, is it the beginning, or is it like leading outwards from the end, you know, or towards some other part of the spectrum? So I think there's a lot to be said about our typical color spectrums. And Anthony, I hope you are good. Hope you're thriving. Hope you're well. How are you guys doing in the chat? Are you thriving? Are you arriving? Are you driving? Or are you depriving yourself of the things that you find are inciting? Don't incite yourself too much. Stay excited a little bit, just excited enough not to incite absolute reflection of everything. I think this is really what we're talking about here. How much potential there is here in this universe. And we want to sort of put everything down to having a beginning and an ending, and everything has to be categorized. But I suppose that's what you're getting at, isn't it, Cosmic? There's no one way to categorize things.
Well, yes and no. I mean, like, there's always like everybody has their own kind of categorization system, but I think in the same, that's just how we kind of approach reality. We all have our own sort of universes that we kind of navigate through, and each one of those universes has its own kind of language and epistemological structure.
Yeah, and I think that also, like, when we look at physical reality, it's like, what do you see as being the first point of physical reality? Some people might say, well, the smell of things. Some people might say it's the feeling of the earth under their feet. Other people might say, well, that's all abstract. The feeling of the air moving through their lungs, what makes them feel alive. Other people might say, no, it's the taste of the food. And I think, like, physicality in this way is like very difficult to define. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're laying on your back and you become really relaxed. And I mean really relaxed. There will come a point where you will lose body consciousness completely. Like, you may as well be in one of those. I've never been in one of those tanks, but I know what it feels like to be in a tank from practicing deep relaxation. You don't know which way is up or down. It becomes very abstract. And then it gets to the point where all you can feel is the contact between your body and the earth. And that fades at some point. Namaste, Esme. Are you good? How are you doing? Sending you big love, big blessings. And so that's like a deep state. This is like, people say to me, like, how can I learn to astrally project? And I come out with this answer that people like snub me at. They snub me, oh, he's trying to be clever. I say, just relax. Relax really deeply. And that really is the whole of the story. If you lay on your back and relax really deeply, you will lose all sense of body consciousness. Like, if you relax really deeply, you won't even be able to tell where's the contact point between your body and the earth anymore. And you will feel like you're just floating. And then you will start to get all sorts of interesting experiences, and then, like, they'll get scary, they'll get this, they'll get that. You'll feel like your heart's going to stop when you like leaving the space, and you'll deal with all sorts of other sounds and experiences, beings, what have you. But I think that's like what it comes down to. Could we equate reality to tension, and tension as a reflection of tension? What do you guys think?
What was the question?
Well, I was talking about how when you relax really deeply, you lose contact with the earth. Deep meditation, deep relaxation, you start to drift and you disconnect from the earth. And so tension keeps us locked into the physical reality. And that tension is reflected through attention, right? Your attention, tension. I don't think it's a coincidence that those two words are bouncing off of the same vibrational fields of sound. So is tension what locks us in to physical reality? Is physical reality just really got to do with tension between polarities? And these tensions that build between different polarities creates this experience of physicality. And if we drop all of the tension, then our attention is released. And we're no longer experiencing attention, we're then experiencing awareness. And in the point of experiencing pure awareness, we are expanding our consciousness outwards towards unseen and unphysical aspects of reality. So you could think of tension as being the lock, the band that keeps you in physicality. It's an interesting concept. And it sort of gives us an idea about what attention is. Because we think of attention as like wherever we place our focus or our awareness. But what is the difference between attention and awareness in your minds? What would you guys say?
I would say that the difference between attention and awareness is that if you're paying attention, you might not be aware. You're kind of like ready for a response, in the sense that when you're aware, I believe that you are paying attention when you're aware, but there's more to it there. And I feel like the awareness is that you are potentially seeing yourself watch things. So there's like a deeper awareness there than just pure attention.
I think it's kind of like I think with awareness, it's more generalized. Like you're just kind of aware of like everything that's going around in your surroundings. Whereas I imagine with attention, your awareness is focused towards some specific category. You're looking for some specific thing that you're trying to find. You're paying attention to, I don't know, you're a security guard. You're paying attention to see if someone's robbing the store, or you're paying attention to your garden to see if the gophers are eating your plants or something. When you're paying attention, your mind has an intention that it's focused on. Whereas when it's just pure awareness, there's not necessarily some single object or idea that you're focusing on. You're just kind of sucking in everything like a sponge, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, please continue, brother.
I also like the idea of tension allowing for attention. And I think that like it kind of aligns with Buddhism, suggesting that like the suffering leads to joy. Without suffering, we don't develop the gratitude and yearning towards harmony that gives us such peace and happiness. So I feel like the tension is something that kind of like drives us to fix ourselves. And firstly, people will try to fix the world around them, but once they're willing to work on themselves, they can switch their focus and look within and really make the magic happen. Because it's really our responsibility to master ourselves. And the more we try to change the world around us, it's kind of tinker with things where it's not really our responsibility to do. But by influencing ourselves, we will have an influence on the world around us that's coming from a better place.
Yeah, I would say that there's a lot there, got to do with, and like you guys are both saying, I think we're all sort of pushing the same proverbial boulder up the hill. The idea of expectation. Was it you that said that, Cosmic? I think, or the idea of the implication that there is an expectation. There's a particular focus of your awareness. So you have awareness, and then awareness has to be stretched towards a particular point. And when awareness is stretched towards a particular point, it produces tension on the consciousness field. Yeah. And that attention of stretching the focus of the awareness field produces something specific, as in specification. Namaste, the star. How are you doing? Good. And exactly, the tension gives contrast and resistance, so the soul can experience the contrasts of yang and yin. So I would say that tension is these two forces, expansion and contraction, working together. And so this is a really interesting idea of tension, attention, awareness, because where awareness, we wear our awareness as space. How's that for a concept? Let you guys digest that for a moment. We wear our awareness as space. And the wearing of the space means we literally clothe ourselves, our consciousness, in space. We wear it like a garment, and it gives us position. And with the position means we can now deposit. And so we are able to strike a pose because of tension. Think about it. You wouldn't be able to walk if it weren't for tension in your body. You wouldn't be able to move your leg, because the whole locomotion has got to do with this thing pulls against this thing, so that thing can push against that thing. And then that thing pulls so that this thing can push, and this thing pushes, that thing can push. And while those things are pushing, this thing's pulling and that thing's pushing. It's like a set of levers that all operate in opposition toward each other, like fulcrums, in order to create this dynamic shift of energy. And it gets translated into power, and that power becomes movement and action. So the whole notion of movement is related to this spatial field around us that we can navigate. But we need tension to be able to navigate that physically. And we need attention in order to be able to navigate that mentally, because the mental navigation needs to be in alignment with the physical navigation in order to create that succinct experience of physicality and reality. So it's interesting. I mean, we're almost diving straight into the deep mystical pool of the source of this Jacob's ladder. Because if you think about what a ladder is it's two rungs, right? Or it's two poles, shafts, with many little rungs upon which we step. And each rung, you have to pull yourself on one rung and push yourself on another rung in order to pull on that rung and push with. And so you're pushing and pulling together while pushing and pulling. And so it's quite interesting how we literally climb a ladder. It's got to do with these oppositions of force. So how can we equate this then to the idea of spiritual movement and attainment? Before we get to attainment, we should probably look at the beginning, the root source code, the actual progression and movement of a spiritual potential into a different field of spiritual potential, in the same way that you can move ice into water and water into steam in order to produce heat that can move a turbine in order to produce some kind of power, action, energy that can fulfill some kind of a need of sorts. So I think, like, when it comes to this spiritual dynamic, it is really an experience of attention which is bound by tension. And without tension, there cannot be attention, because tension is related to the 10 fingers and the 10 holes of the body. And in order to account for the 10th hole of the body, we need to consider the umbilical. Yes, we tie a knot in it as children when we're babies, but there is that hole. It's one of the holes in the body. So we've got these 10 holes in the body, and these 10 fingers and these 10 toes. And so we look at the Kabbalah then, in this sense, the 10 Sefirot, yeah, and how they represent the enad, the enagram, coming into completion in the 10th sphere, Malkut, physicality, the physical sphere through which we experience the guf, the physical body, which is like the internalization of this external sphere that we're experiencing. But they are all really the culmination of the enagram becoming the 10th.
I have a question. I know most people have 10 holes in their body, but have y'all ever seen anybody or heard anybody that has extra holes in their ears?
No, that's a new one to me.
Yeah, I've been studying that, and there's people that have these holes in their extra holes in their ears that looks like there's some kind of a different arrangement there for some people. And I feel like when aquatic mammals live in the ocean long enough, they can begin to start to breathe out of their ears. And then after a while, they can breathe out of a porthole. Their ears kind of move back to the top of their head so that they don't have to raise out of the water too far. But I feel like one of humans' ancestors is likely to be an aquatic hominid, and it kind of explains why we've lost our coat of fur. And one out of I think it's like 1 out of 100 people have webbed toes, and like 1 out of 1,000 people have a tail. And like there's all these weird things that kind of come about from being in the water. Webbed hands and feet help us propel through the water. Loss of a coat of fur obviously helps a lot with less drag. It's also been suggested that women have large breasts because it helps them when they carry their babies on their back. They need those hips for the baby to be able to hold on to their hair, and they ride on their back, and the breasts keep them afloat in the front so that they can carry a baby as well. Because we don't really see that in other primates or anything like that. So the features that we have don't really seem to tie back to primates as much as they do to aquatic mammals. There's a bit of both.
That's a very interesting concept. It can cause people to think about breasts in a way that they've never considered breasts before.
Yeah. People have been doing research on this, and there's a really good diagram that kind of shows all of the features of the body, why we have it, and how it could be useful for being in the water.
I would think that would be why the breasts are where they are.
Now, some people have 4 nipples. Like I have 3.5 nipples or 4 nipples. There's some down below. That primitive kind of trait from back before we were more primitive. Maybe we were Homo erectus or something like that. Maybe before that.
That's interesting.
Maybe Neanderthals.
Maybe it is from a time when we used to migrate, and women walking around with dangling breasts became a problem. And so the body sort of adapted, and we're like, well, we don't need so many breasts. We'll just have 2. We'll make them double size, triple size, and we'll put them up here so that they help with the baby. Because you can imagine, like, if there was a time when we did migrate, like they say that we did, I think they're wrong about the times personally, about when we were like hunter-gatherers wandering around. I don't think it was 10,000 years ago. I think we're talking tens or hundreds of thousands of years ago that we were definitely hunter-gatherers. I think we've been civilized for much longer, and not just 10, but tens of, I think 10 to 15,000 years ago, we were much more technologically advanced than what we are now. We didn't just wake up that way. I think it took us a long time to become civilized, and for civilization to move towards developing technology to that extent. So I would say it must have taken 10, 15, 20,000, 30,000 years just to get to the level of technology we had in 10,000 BC, for example. And so we've got to be thinking that we had technology for longer for us to have developed the pyramids. We don't have the ability to build them today. And they're definitely not 3,000 or 4,000 years old. I think we could all like pretty much rest assured that has been a fallacy. Many of these fallacies are falling away, but it is interesting, like what you say. It stands to reason though that would be a natural place for breasts to evolve on a woman, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think like in other mammals, they're kind of in like the lower abdomen, but like in primates, they are up on the chest, but they're not pronounced like in humans or anything like that. But like we have an issue where when humans give birth, the cranium is very large, almost too big for the birth canal. But we're not the only ones that have that issue. Spider monkeys are the ones that have the worst issue with that. They have an extremely large cranium, and they oftentimes are not able to survive childbirth. Or if they can, the baby won't make it. So it's a very difficult process. And it kind of makes me wonder, why do we need such a large cranium? Why do we have to learn all of these behaviors? And how come we can't be more instinctual? And I feel like as we become more instinctual, when we find ways to be instinctual towards that are mutually beneficial to us in the environment, we might not need as much of a large cranium. And it could really help women a lot because it's become very difficult in childbirth. They've really been doing a lot of cesarean sections for pretty much everybody now because the risk factors involved. And so there is a missing out of the inoculation of the probiotics in the birth canal that a lot of people are missing out on, which is in the benefit of the medical institution, because makes people very sickly for the rest of their lives. So they could really cash in on that. And by telling people they're really trying to make things safer and that they're going to leave a scar on you, but your kid's going to be coming out better. It's, you could take that with a grain of salt, because the kid is going to come out alive, which is great, but the kid is going to be compromised. And so in order to inoculate the kid, you just got to get a little a bit of the probiotics from the birth canal and just put it into the kid's nose or mouth, and the kid will be fine. But they don't really have the impetus to do that just yet. I think people have to start to be more aware of this before it's going to become more standard practice.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You know how many women have spoken to me, and they've said to me that they were warned that they needed to get a cesarean, and they chose not to. I know a lot of women that have had births at home, refusing doctors, refusing surgery, and they were told they needed this. And the number of times that I've heard women being told by medical professionals that they need a cesarean and that they didn't, and that they were so glad that they hadn't because their child ended up being healthy, is overwhelming. It's almost like they want us to have cesareans. I think it must be more traumatic.
Or maybe what's going on is they're just thinking about liability. I think when you rule your life out of fear, it becomes chaos for everyone around you and yourself. It's not the right way to go. And I think Caucasians are the worst. We have, like, around the world, people have really derogatory names for the Caucasian people, and it's not like that with any other race. Probably because we go and invade everywhere, and so they're very aware of us everywhere and see us in a poor light. But we got the Africans see us as the white devil. The Native Americans see us as the pale face. The Latin Americans see us as the gringos, very uptight and paranoid and fearful and living through fear. And so, like, they see us kind of being ridiculous, like wearing too much clothing all the time, having too substantial of a shelter that's kind of ridiculous. It's barring us from our origins of the world around us. And so it seems like maybe what happened was Caucasians potentially became subterranean around 8,000 years ago, because we weren't that pale until about 8,000 years ago. We suddenly lost our pigment. And if we were subterranean, it's a much more controllable environment there. I can imagine coming from a subterranean environment, coming back onto the land and having to deal with bugs and predators and stuff. That would be way more difficult than people who had already been there the whole time. So to me, that's a possible stage that is missing in our window of human evolution and human history in fairly recent times. 8,000 years ago is not that long ago. So that kind of puts us in the time between Göbekli Tepe in Mesopotamia. Maybe there was climate inundation and people were forced to go live subterranean. Maybe they were forced out of certain areas and they were in too cold of a climate, and it was easier for them to live in caves and underground. It's hard to say. We know that Darren, which was built around that time, was able to host like around 10,000 people or more. I'm not sure if that's actually more than that, but large underground city has been found in Turkey that hosted thousands of people. And so that could kind of explain one of the issues why white people are so kind of like barred from nature. They might have had it easy for a long time down in Darren, potentially, or other places.
Yeah, I often think of all the nonsense, the ideas like the circumcision of boys and girls. You see it predominantly in Africa of girls as well. And many of the other kind of weird things that we've done, physical kind of abuse and contortions. Some African people, what they do to their ears it's horrendous to watch, right? The way they get these big rings in their ears of metal to the point where if they take them out, their ears just turn into like dribbling lines of string, loopy string, and you go like, oh, that can't be good for your hearing, you know. And like these ears are important. They've been formed the way they have to show us how acoustics, the acoustic environment we're living in. But I think that's an interesting point. The birth is probably the first step on the physical plane, but then this is sort of like a mirror. Everything that we do in the physical plane is a mirror for the spiritual plane. So I think it's probably a good way to look at this Jacob's ladder of attainment. We should probably follow the line of conversation that we've stumbled upon, which is that we come into this world being born, but we're not really fully here yet. Something that we forget. Being born just means good to hear, Autician. Good to hear. Bernadine, I hope you're well. I hope you're all thriving. What were you saying? When you had your first twin, natural, second twin, cesarean, 45 minutes later, you thought you were hit by a bus. Yeah, like I think like cesareans, sometimes they're necessary. Sometimes they like somebody else said that they were strangled by an umbilical cord. I think there are times when a cesarean are probably a good idea. But so many women have told me that the doctors just want to do cesarean because, like you say, it's a liability thing maybe. And maybe it's quicker and easier, right? A natural birth can take many, many hours. A cesarean, they can just put quick, done, sew it up, finished, next, right? It's like, it's much more efficient for the doctors. So I think there's two sides to that story, There's the times when it's needed and the times when it's more efficient. And but at the same time, I get the feeling that like it must make a fairly significant change. When it's necessary, there's normally some trauma involved, I'm guessing. Like the child won't come, the child's scared, the mom's scared, there's some kind of an issue and you need to intervene. But I think that if there isn't a problem and you do the cesarean, you might be creating a sense of trauma, possibly. I mean, I can't speak from experience because I'm not a cesarean. It was a very easy birth, and I just popped right out. My mom was very young and very fit, so I can't relate to having been a cesarean. But just from a lot of people, what they've told me, it's interesting to get that idea. So looking at birth as the first step of entry in the world, and then 21 years of development. That's an interesting concept. We think of ourselves as being fully here when we're little children, but are we fully here or are we partially here? Are we still bringing some essence into the physical realm from elsewhere? And then this Jacob's ladder, it's almost like a ladder that leads back to elsewhere, back to home. This brings up a really interesting conversation. Have you guys heard of that book? What is it called? The Secret Supper. Cosmic? India, have you guys heard of it? Any of you guys in the chat come across that book?
Not familiar, no.
The Secret Supper is a work. I've read more about it than I can say that I've read it. So I've read a lot of commentaries about the Secret Supper from other people over the years. It's an old book. It was banned by the Catholics. Of course, like a lot of the old scriptural Gnostic scriptures, which is basically most of the scriptures, were banned. And it comes from the Cathar. Is it the Cathar people? I think it's the Cathar Merovingians. Yeah. And it's basically a dialogue with Emmanuel, who people call the Christ, Jesus.
I wonder if that's where the word catharsis comes from the Cathars.
Well spotted.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well spotted. I think that's exactly the relation of the catharsis.
Yeah.
And Catholic, you know, cathol, catharsis. So anyway, this book, The Last Supper, what it focuses on is, and I hope you guys in the chat can hear me well enough. Let me know if my voice is too soft or too loud or too anything, if there's a difference in loudness between my voice and the other people's voices, because my girlfriend has mentioned to me that happens. It's obviously annoying if one person's voice is louder than softer and louder. You have to continually adjust your volume. So let me know if everything's running smoothly. Though, yeah, you can't see the levels. On OBS Studios, which I'm going to be using, you can see the levels of everybody's audio, little lights. So you can literally see it on your dashboard. Excellent. Thanks, Vincent. So yeah, this secret supper basically is this dialogue between Emmanuel, who they call Jesus, and he's being asked a lot of questions, and he's talking about the creator of this world. Basically, the bottom line is this: Satan created the world, not God. And that Satan is basically the boss, the God of this world. And that the God of the Old Testament was Satan. And that's why all of the blood sacrifice was demanded. That's why animals had to be sacrificed. That's why Abraham was about to cut out the heart of his child, because this was what had been demanded of the God of this world, Satan. And so their practice and belief, which ended up with a lot of them being put to the stake, drowned, burnt, tortured, martyred, if you will, because of their belief that the Catholic Church was worshipping Satan, and that all of the cultural religion that had been basically taken from the Old Testament was basically the religion of Satan. And so it's a very interesting idea, because it sort of brings us back to this Jacob's ladder that we find in the Old Testament, right? And it even goes as far as to suggest that Enoch was one of Satan's heralds, and mentions how Satan had gotten the serpent to seduce Eve, and in the seduction of Eve had poured forth the seed of the serpent into Eve, and from then had put lust into Eve, and children had come forth from Eve, and Adam had lust for Eve and Eve's children. And this started this web of, and this sort of makes put sense into why, like, we weren't allowed to eat from the knowledge of good and evil, right? Only the tree of life, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, wasn't allowed for us, because we're not allowed to know the difference between good and evil, which, if you think about it, doesn't make sense. So that's basically like this, what this ancient book is really about. And so it's an interesting concept. Well, what the bottom line premise is that this world has been constructed by the devil and the devil's minions, who are all these fallen angels, and that they had been cast out. And they speak about how, if my memory holds, that when this fallen angel, who used to command all the angels in the heavens, was cast out, he dived down in through, he convinced before he was cast out, sorry, that's right, he had convinced the angel of the air to open the air to him, and he had come through the air, and he traversed the air. And then he'd met the angel of the water, and he'd convinced the angel of the water to unlock the gates for him, and he had dived through the waters. And when he got to the earth, he convinced the angel of the earth to unlock the earth to him. And he then traveled through the earth and got to the final element of fire, which was the burning, and he couldn't pass through the element of fire. He was trapped there. Then he returned back through the element of fire convincing the angel that he was the king of the element of fire, and then came to the element of earth and convinced that he was the king of the element of earth. He came through and convinced that these belonged to him. Once he had gone through convincing them that all of these elements belonged to him, he then owned the keys of entry into these elements. He then traversed back to the heavens, and he convinced 33.3%, 1/3 of all the angels, to join him. This is this book. This is the idea. And then he dived back down into physicality, bringing his horde of angelic hosts who he had made a promise to them that you would rule with me over the kingdom of earth. And when they arrived in the earth, they had to take on flesh, earthly clay bodies, as I think it's explained in that book. And then when God had recognized what had happened, God had stripped them of the fifth element, which is an element that this being, this fallen angel, didn't have access to. And it stripped them of their divine rights of the fifth element. And they were trapped in these four elements in their physical bodies, and were not able to traverse out of this physical realm. And that reincarnation is how the souls are recycled through this physical reality. But that the beings that are being recycled are really essentially the angelic host that have fallen from the heavens and are trapped in these physical bodies, which is us, essentially. And this is why we have that fifth element, spiritual potential, within us, and the ability to transcend the laws of this earth and bring a spiritual essence to physicality. So anyway, that's this work, which is this particular writing. We should probably discuss it at length at some point. I should find a copy of it. Maybe I can find an audiobook copy and actually go and listen to it, the whole book from beginning to end, and break it down. But like, this is something that I've come across over the years, there was something quite interesting. And I think a lot of ideas have taken from this idea. And so for those of you that are out there are interested, you can go find the book. It's called The Secret Supper.
I feel like the narrative of that book is very much in line with what you find on a Google search when you try to learn about the devil, in the sense that the devil is evil and wants to do harm to people. But I've always known a different narrative that's completely different from that, and kind of shows that the devil was more scapegoated and punished, as opposed to being the purveyor of evil. And so I've always known that God created a plan to make people with free will to be able to choose evil or good. And that Lucifer stood in, opposed to his plan, and said that, how can you make people be willing to choose evil? This sounds like a terrible plan. Why is this okay with you? I would have it that people would not be able to choose evil and they would live in good. And so he was then cast out of heaven and punished and sent down to that realm, and no longer able to have his throne in his place. He was the messenger of God. He was the scribe of God. And so after he retorted against the plan and he was cast down, then he was here to guide people, to help them understand how to choose good, because they've been put in a place where they can choose evil, and he doesn't want them to fall victim to God's plan. And so he comes down here to show them the difference between good and evil, so that they would be appealed to good. But the stories have always kind of been switched. And so after that was what really happened, it was said that he chose to tempt people and entice them with evil to come away from God and become their leader here. And that's not really part of the real story. That's part of the narrative of the psyop that wants to put Lucifer and the devil down as being the purveyor of punishment and evil. But if you really look at it, the people are being judged by who? Does he judge anyone? Does he have the power to judge anyone? No, God is the judge. And so God judges and punishes people. Lucifer is just there to be punished with them. And so over the years, the church has kind of pushed this away, and Gnosticism has kind of helped us realize that the God of Christianity is not necessarily a divine being. humans have the divine spark within us, and we're being led by the creation of a divine being, which went awry. And so this kind of makes more sense when you look at the new understanding that's been given to us by Gnosticism. You start to realize that Yaldabaoth, or Yahweh, or Baal, whoever this God is, has been laughing at us, has been put us through the ringer, and has had a creation that is not fair to us. And that there was his first angel that was trying to help us and prevent us from being put into this situation. But he is now has lost his place there. But I don't really feel like the devil, it was his place to entice us. I feel like it was God's plan to have the devil go down and entice Job. He didn't come up with that plan, I don't think. Although if he did, he was trying to do it to impress God, along with the plan that God had and his values and his prerogatives. But in the situation with Job, when the devil went down to test how much faith Job really had through adversity, it ended up proving that through all of this adversity he had pushed on him, that Job still maintained his faith. And so even in that situation where the devil went down to tempt him, it was really God's plan to have the devil go down and do that for him. And what happened was it strengthened his faith. And so when we have situations like that, it starts to make us wonder and question things where, if the devil was here to entice us into sin, would that really lead us to falling away from good? Or would it really lead us to start to question ourselves and start to offer more guidance, becoming more aware of the negative impact of sin and becoming aware of our chances for our salvation and repentance? I don't really necessarily feel like drawing people towards evil or bad is necessarily going to be appealing to them if they really see what's going on. But as far as like in our civilization, you see that people are drawn towards like money. I feel like the government is more evil than our devil. The devil itself was said to have offered us wisdom and guidance, showed us the difference between good and evil, which we weren't allowed to know because ignorance is bliss. So if we live in ignorance and we don't know the difference between good and evil, it's going to be hard to realize what our decisions even are. What direction are we trying to go in? But I think that once we see evil and once we see bad, it shows us where to not go. Now, those people might be captured within it and kind of enticed by it. But I think people are onlooking would be able to know that they need to instill more guidance to their children to not go in that direction. But I feel like civilization and like nature are pulling people in two different directions. You could say that people that are being drawn towards nature are more drawn towards embracing challenges ahead of us and becoming intimate with something that's somewhat chaotic and daunting to us. Becoming willing to be strengthened by it will very much help an individual break down limitations. Then we have people that are kind of enticed by civilization and its traps. And those people are very much weakened by civilization. You can kind of imagine your couch potato sitting there, feeding his face on the couch, having become a slave in return from slavery to just kind of indulge in like staring at a blank screen and stuffing his face with frankenfood junk foods. And they're like miserable because they're so angry that, you know, they don't have a good thing to do in life. And they're kind of sitting there just prepared to like have to get rest for the next slave day. And I think a lot of people have been drained with the food weapon system we have in America, at least. It kind of leaches your energy and drains your vitality. And so after 8 hours of work, people are done. But they found the cordyceps mushrooms in China. They used them to beat a lot of the endurance running track events. And so people have been using cordyceps. I found that like if you're stuck in that slave routine, you can take cordyceps mushrooms, have 8 hours of energy at work, and then have another 8 hours of energy at home to spend with your kids and your family and your pets. And I think that could make a big difference. There's a lot of things that have been pushed on us that have made it hard for us to live, but there's a lot of things that nature provides to us that makes us be able to break through those barriers. And so if people started to be able to look towards nature to understand where like real foods come from, things that grow from the ground, like nuts and seeds and roots and things like that, which is what we used to eat and live to 900 years before the flood, have been kind of like put along the wayside in place of famine foods like bread and cheese and meat. And so a lot of people still live in these lifestyles of things that are really not good for us, that are overindulgent. And so I feel like that has a lot to do with the ways of civilization pulling us into comfort. And so other people are more drawn towards confronting challenges instead of comfort. And those people tend to come out on top. They're not easily trapped. But I feel like how much does this really have to do with the powers that be around us that are divine versus how much does this have to do with the stories that are pushed on us by our civilization that are said to be divine? So you have to wonder about these things.
What are your thoughts, dear Cosmic?
On what exactly? I know Indy kind of covered a lot of territory.
Do you think that the devil is inherently ill-willed towards humanity and wants to make them suffer for his benefit?
You know, my honest point of view on the devil is that I don't really think he's necessarily a separate entity from God. I think he's God's shadow, because here's the thing, is that my whole take on the biblical God is I think the whole just concept of it is just totally contradictory, because we can't be responsible for our actions if God is all-knowing and already can anticipate what we are going to do before we do it, right? Like you think about the Adam and Eve story. The whole idea of the Adam and Eve stories, you have Adam and Eve, in the garden, and God is testing whether or not they're going to eat from the tree of the fruit of knowledge. Either they eat the fruit or they don't eat the fruit. Well, if you're God and you're truly all-knowing, then you must already know that Adam and Eve are going to eat the fruit from the tree. If you are all-knowing, and if you're not all-knowing, and if you don't know that they're going to eat from the tree, then you're not really infallible, and therefore you don't really have the authority for us to blindly follow this deity in the first place. So the way I would look at really more the Bible and the biblical God, I think he's just kind of, one lesser being, like any other, narcissistic person who thinks they're God and thinks they're the Holy Universe. I mean, think about how many people have taken, a psychedelic and been convinced that they individually are the God of this universe. Happens pretty frequently, right? And then imagine you're in a celestial realm. You have an astral body. You have the ability to, change things with your thoughts and your perceptions, and you can influence people. Just imagine how much more convincing that you would be the Almighty in that context. And basically what the Fae has shown me with Zarfexology is that every bubble has an edge in the universe. Every universe has an edge that can be transcended. And that's really what it is that this particular deity, this particular God, has created one kind of dream world within our earth realm, right? But you can step outside of that dream realm anytime you want. I mean, obviously it's difficult due to all the, the emotional and psychological teaching that a lot of people go through. But that's kind of really what my practice has been about, learning to sort of step outside of the mythology bubbles that we trap ourselves in and really see the earth in its primordial natural mystery outside of the... See, I think in a lot of ways, like, I'm not really interested in, mythology or stories for the simple fact that I don't think that existence can be told in a single story. I don't think you can encapsulate the whole thing in one narrative, no matter how long that narrative even is. It's like everything is sort of like all these different universes kind of clustered together to create this deeper kind of reality that's, kind of beyond our comprehension. So I think in terms of the biblical God, like, I don't see how really any one being can bring, everything into the universe. And from the Fae's perspective, in order to really create a universe, you need a god and a goddess. In the same way that you need like a man and a woman to create a baby, you can't truly create a universe without God and goddess and their their union together, creating the reality that you exist in. And for there to only be God, minus the parent, then it makes sense that instead of, having a baby with a woman, God's more like, Pinocchio, making his son out of wood and carving it and like putting it together with magic. It's like there's a whole different narrative. It's a kind of like an asexual sort of reproduction. So I think in a lot of ways, it's just kind of an incomplete narrative about the nature of reality. And, because I think at the same time, though, like, Christians and, Judeo-Christian people are always talking about, the stress and need for, households to have a mother and a father raising their kids. All I'm saying is I think that same dynamic is true in the godly spiritual realm, that there needs to be a masculine and feminine balance to raise humanity in the same way you need a mother and father to properly raise kids. I don't think, so I think when it comes to Yahweh and Jehovah, that's my take on it.
I feel like it's very interesting dilemma. We have like in Buddhism, they say that suffering brings joy. And so we might want to thank the one that brings suffering to us because of the joy that it yields. So who do we thank in Christianity? Do we thank the devil or do we thank God for giving us suffering? So it's an interesting situation. I feel like maybe that's what's going on. We just needed to have like a good cop, bad cop situation. And maybe it's not really clear as to which side is responsible for blaming, right? You caused all these problems, whereas other people might see the same problems and thank them. You gave me all these problems that brought me to my solutions. You helped me build my resilience, right? So there's like the benefit to both sides there. And so it's interesting that, they would kind of portray it in such a way, and it's vague in the sense that Franklin has interpreted it in one way and seen that published in a book that kind of resonated with his understanding. Whereas I have this other understanding that I kind of picked up from Sunday school that was pushed on me when I was kicked out when I was like 7 years old. And I never really kind of had gotten back into it, but I had this first foundational understanding from then that kind of has stuck with me to this day. And so to me, it seems like maybe what's really going on is like the Gnostic story is really bringing more picture to the light, where the God of Judaism and Christianity is a warmonger and a misogynist. And like, why? So to me, I feel like women really rule society, even though they've been subjugated to be discriminated. They're the ones that really have men make their decisions for them most of the time, and they do most of the shopping. So in like a consumer-based society, women pretty much rule society. They make it float. They make it work. But maybe they're using women's their impulses to take advantage of them, to deplete them. And so like women used to be able to go out and forage and go out into the forest and come back with like a meal to help us stay as healthy as can be. And now we have to go out and do some other work for somebody else and then go buy food from somebody else that got the food and then take it home and use utensils and crafts to cook the food that other people make. And so it's really just become like such a depleting situation to have to rely on so many other people. Whereas in some way it's helpful to have that so that we can provide to each other. But in another way, if you looked at it, we don't have our autonomy anymore. We're very much reliant on each other. And if we're reliant upon each other in a thriving system, that would be awesome. But we're relying upon each other in a depleted system that's failing. And so do we want to really trust in the system? Maybe we need to improve it. Maybe we need to create a new system. I don't know. But it seems to me that the God, being a misogynist, has major red flags for me. Whereas all people come from a woman and are nursed by a woman, and they're the real creators. Whereas men concede creation. Why are we valuing a man as a creator in a world that's created by women? It seems to me a bit off base. I feel like it's just, if you take a step back and take a look, there's so many red flags that are there. But as far as the red flags with the devil, I feel like a lot of it is more scapegoating, because how much power did he really have? Was he allowed to choose to create this world? Now, in your interpretation of that book, it almost seems like he was allowed to control this world. Even though it may not have been his creation, but there's so much of a paradox involved but it seems like contradictions to a lot of people. But I'm sure we could kind of tease out the paradox a little more.
Yeah, I mean it's very interesting, when we look at all these things, and for me it's really interesting because when I look at Gnosticism, I think it's really not well represented. We've done a show on Gnosticism already,
Yeah.
and we got a pretty good look at Gnosticism. So this is the book I was talking about. It. So it's called Interrogato Johannes, right? That's what the book is called. It's called The Questions of John, and it's Cena Secreta, right? The Gospel of the Secret Supper was a Bogomil apocryphal text from Bulgaria, and it's what we can see that we have left of the Polyxian treatise, which became important Cathar scripture, right? So this is a basic now we know that there were like a lot of books banned. We don't know all the books that were banned, but we know that there were 90, 100 odd books that were banned by Catholicism when Catholicism got formed, and they only took certain books, right? So the idea is that this is related to one of those banned works that had sort of resurfaced in Bulgaria, because obviously the Romans were so harsh. Yeah, I mean, as we can see, when you go into the 1st and 2nd centuries, it was pain of death to have any of the apocryphal texts, right? And not only pain of death, but you would suffer, your children would suffer, your family would suffer, you would lose your property, you would lose your standing in society, your family would be disgraced just if you owned one of those apocryphal texts. So you can imagine why they all were so hidden away. So there are 2 manuscripts that have survived, and the one is found in the archives of the Inquisition in Carcassonne and Languedoc, which was a Cathar stronghold. Now, if you know the history of this, there was a great expedition where I think 40,000 people were killed in a city. And I forget the name of the guy. When he arrived there, he just basically unalived the entire city to get all the Cathars, because they wanted to eradicate the Cathars, because the Catholics felt so extremely threatened by the Cathars, because they claimed to hold a secret treatise of John asking John the one of the disciples asking Emmanuel these questions, and so that's like answers and questions. So it's a first-person narrative written by John the evangelist, who's these questions that he's asking Emmanuel, Jesus. And so what is covered there is the book begins with the story of opposing cosmic forces. So it's really interesting that there are these different versions of this out there. This actually dovetails exactly with the ideas of Yaldabaoth, if you think about it, right? It's basically the Yaldabaoth story, if you want to get right down to it. Though what is interesting about it is this is a biblical script in the same way as all the other biblical scripts, which are the actual writings of Emmanuel, which in itself is rather interesting, where he's explaining mystical things to exactly what was wrong. And it's to me, I find this fascinating, because like I always look at the Old Testament and I see that if you were to take a little girl or little boy and strap them to a rock ready to remove their heart, you would be arrested, right? And you would probably be sent to an asylum for treatment and assistance and be kept away from society, because you would be a danger to society. But in those days, you were considered a saint, right? And so that's just really, really interesting, like really profoundly important recognition. And I think what we do know is that we've been fed a lot of lies in the Bible. And the extent of the lies is really hard to pin down, right? There's a lot of information that doesn't add up. Like when you look at them, there's too many contradictions. Whoever compiled that book has done something really interesting in the way that they have presented all these opposing informations in one book, where, for example, in the Bible, it says that slavery is completely okay and it's not a sin to own and possess slaves. It's not a sin to beat your slaves as long as you don't beat them that they unalived. As long as within 2 or 3 days of beating your slaves that they survive and they start to recover their health and that they're not permanently maimed, you have not sinned against God. So keeping slaves was acceptable in the eyes of God. Slavery was, if anything, promoted by the Bible. In fact, it was given you a very particular set of rules for how to keep your slaves, assuming that you would have slaves because you're a Christian. So, there's a lot of information there. And where on earth this idea of stoning people came from, right? If people didn't follow the commandments, they were stoned. That's pretty heavy if you think about it, right? So if you caught somebody working on the Sabbath, they were stoned, unalived. So let's say they had to work on the Sabbath because their children were hungry, right? They were unalived for trying to procure food for their kids. There's just something a bit strange when we look at this. And so this is what gets me thinking, like getting to this Jacob's ladder. What is the first barrier that keeps us trapped in this world and prevents us from discovering our true inner nature, our true selves, our higher potentials? Is it what we think we know? Are we fed a doctrine? And do we believe that doctrine? Does that doctrine twist us inside and produce tension, so that the attention that we use to project our awareness is such a narrow focus that we twist our perception of this world, each other, circumstances, to fit the narrative of the belief system that we've been fed and the propaganda that we've digested, in order for us to become locked into a particular ideology so that we can become proponents of that ideology like little pieces on a risk board, expanding until you populate the whole world and turn the whole world into a resounding echo chamber of a particular ideological perspective. And then we got to stop and look at that ideology and go, is it a healthy ideology? Is it not? Are there any healthy ideologies? Is that one of the most important and powerful steps towards spiritual attainment, is releasing and letting go of what our belief systems are and our ideologies in order to embrace the wholeness of the inner child? Because the inner child doesn't necessarily have a knowledge of how things are, a knowledge of what things are, but an openness to experience all different sorts of possible experiences and perceptions, and to be able to stay natural. I don't know. What do you guys think? This whole ideology, is that the chain that keeps us locked down?
It's an interesting ideology. There's a number of different interpretations of Jacob's ladder. Sometimes it's associated with 7, which I kind of equivocate with like the 7 celestial bodies, where like in the ancient narratives, they would talk about going through the 7 gates of the 7 celestial bodies to get to heaven or hell. It was kind of like almost as if it was the same place, but it had 2 different names. But I feel like they were going to Pluto. Maybe they go in a different direction. They were going to Pluto to go to Hades. They're going to Sun to go to heaven, potentially. I'm not really sure. But the number 7 kind of illuminates the parallel of the celestial bodies. But then you have the number 130 is also associated with the ladder. There's also gematria for Sinai and Sulam. And so 130, I think, is the number of steps that you have to take in Kabbalah to be able to ascend Jacob's ladder, to be able to be capable of learning the root language, the secret root language of the heavenly kingdom that's in the Torah, that's not evident to people that learn the branch languages. So 130 is an interesting number of steps. They say the first step is to overcome the ego, the delusion of separation that we can steal from people without knowing. When we talk to people that don't want to hear us talk, we're stealing from their attention. When we do something or we're not being paid to do at work, we're stealing from our boss. And then, of course, we can steal actual physical things as well. And by doing these things, we're only hurting ourselves, because the separation that we see between ourselves as other people that we're taking from is a delusion. We're all one, and we're all created together, and we're all united, and we all live in the heart of God together. So when we harm each other, we're only harming ourselves. And when we can help others and be compassionate, we're only helping ourselves in the long term as well, because we're helping everybody, and it really helps us. So things like warmongering and slave mongering and misogyny and hatred of other people and violence towards other people, they really don't go in line with the teachings of Jesus, but they do go in line with the teachings of the Old Testament or the Torah. And so there's a stark difference between the God that Jesus speaks of as a merciful, forgiving God, and the God that they talk about before the times of Jesus that was a punishing, wrathful, jealous, angry God. And so they kind of came in different ages as well. So you have like the angry, punishing God in the age of Taurus, and then later Aries. And then in the age of Pisces, that changes and there's a shift. And then we see that the forgiveness and the coming together is starting to begin of the people trying to love their neighbors now. Whereas before that, I think there was a lot of power that was gained through divisive mechanisms by making people go against their neighbors and then taking control of the people and taking away their sovereignty, making them servants of the king instead. So it's an interesting dynamic there. You have things going in different directions.
It's very interesting that getting back to the topic, those mushrooms you mentioned, that's very interesting, at the onset. I think I need to take a look at those because they're actually toxic for insects. So they can basically rid your body of creatures invading your body, which is fascinating. But yeah, the whole dream of Jacob's ladder, as I remember it, is there's a dream and there's angels going up the dream, up the ladder on the one side, and angels coming down the ladder on the other side. And I think the implication is ascension and descension simultaneously up and down this ladder, which is quite an interesting concept. So the implication is that while some are becoming more pure and more divine, others are descending from divinity, if that makes sense. And I think that's and Cosmic, you didn't get a chance to speak. What are your thoughts? Are these ideologies the source of all evil? And I use that word loosely.
I wanted to provide a picture for a second, so just give me a second here. I was gonna fix some things here, but yeah, I actually had some thoughts on that, because I think that there's actually, when it comes to these belief systems that you're talking about, these ideologies, there's actually a hierarchical structure to them, which is what I've kind of realized with the Sarfexology. So it's not just that there's just these isolated ideologies. There's kind of a pyramid of sort of aspects about there's different levels of belief systems that encompass higher amounts of reality, for example. So for example, atheism, you could think of as a belief system But nihilism is like the meta belief system that atheism sits underneath. So that's like, so with nihilism, you can encompass not just atheism, but you can also have like a pessimistic spiritual worldview that also encompasses. So then that belief system then covers a higher ground of other belief systems within it.
Did we lose you?
No, I think
No, I just stopped talking.
Are you talking, Cosmic?
I just
Cosmic?
finished talking.
Can
I
you
did.
hear Cosmic?
Can you
I
hear
can
me?
hear. Can you?
Am I not talking loud enough?
It's somewhat quiet, but it's loud enough. It's not that quiet. I don't know. Maybe something going on with his audio or his feed over there. From can't hear me either. All right.
It's back. It's all good.
Oh, good. All right.
Uh-huh.
Good. We're all set here. But no. Interestingly, the Jacob's ladder is said to lead to like a window or a door to the divine. Now, where is that window at in that door? Where does the ladder go to? Like, does it go in another realm up, or does it go up into our heavens that we're familiar with? What do you guys think?
Okay, so I wanted to share a diagram with you. So I wanted, no, wait, hold on. This isn't the right one. I made some changes to it. At least I think I did. Whatever, you guys can talk. Give me a second here. You guys can talk about something else while I pull this up.
Cool. Sounds good. Yeah. Well, they talk about like going to the seven heavens, and there was like, I think, how many celestial bodies did the ancients have and know of? Probably 7, in addition to the earth and the sun. So I think there were 9, but I could be mistaken. And I don't think the sun is one of the bodies that people went through, the celestial bodies. I think they were basically going through the planets, the 7 planets.
So this is kind of what I figured out here. So basically, the way I worked out, there's sort of 7 different types of belief systems. So for example, you have right here, you have monotheism, which is what they call the Theosophite. So this is sort of like a mundane. So basically they kind of like have it into a couple different categories. So there's sort of mundane belief systems, and there's magical belief systems. And then there's believing belief systems, and there are skeptical belief systems. So there's 3 believing belief systems. So that would be like, so up here in non-dualism, that would be like your Buddhism, your Hermeticism, and then down here in monotheism, that's like your Christianity, your Judaism, Islam. Then with the Deosophites, the sort of the magical believing one, that's where you have stuff like paganism, witchcraft, astrology, and so forth. And then on the other side, you have the skeptical belief system. So you have nihilism on one hand. So that's kind of like the meta sort of like, so with non-dualism, everything is one. In nihilism, everything is separate. And then so you have over here, this is sort of the magical skeptical belief system. So that would be like your chaos magic. Everything is just my dream. Everything is just sort of relative and subjective. And then you have the sort of the mundane version, which is the Ozerphites or the void Zerphites. This is what the atheism, that, materialism. And at the very top, this is where these two sort of combine in a mystical experience. But this is a belief. This is something that you can't, it's so meta that you can't like define this belief system in a narrative. So when people have the mystical experience, usually induced by psychedelics or something that happens in their life, based on their temperament, they're either going to be here in the sort of the positive believing meta belief system or the negative nihilistic belief system. So basically, so that's kind of like, for example, like if you have a mystical person and they take LSD, they take it, come out and say, oh my God, everything is one, we're all interconnected. Whereas sometimes people take psychedelics and they're more mystical. It's like, this is proof that everything is meaningless. This is proof that's all, empty and bullshit and nothing really matters. And it shows that within this experience, you can come with a positive or negative conclusion. And so the idea in the Fey magic system is that you need, in order to access the outer Zarfexes truly, you have to get outside of this pyramid entirely. And so that's kind of like the big thing. So I wanted to bring that up because Franklin, I know you talked about the idea that, you know, there's sort of ideologies and belief systems. But what I'm trying to show here with this diagram is that these belief systems have a kind of pyramidal nested hierarchy to them, where there's lower dimensional belief system, which is fourth dimensional, but then you get to the fifth and sixth dimensional belief system, which encompass a larger area of mind space. In a sense, they're larger belief system bubbles, if you will. And so I wanted to kind of bring that up because I think there's an importance to understanding that when it comes to belief systems, there's a kind of a hierarchical structure. They're not just sort of like arbitrary and floating around. There's a kind of a pyramid where they kind of all reinforce each other in this kind of spread out, top down kind of way.
And then what I would say, well, what about the difference between believing and having a choice of believing that something's true or not true, or having no, I don't believe or disbelieve, but having certain experiences which are fundamentally known as a difference to what is believed, if that makes sense. Like a carpenter knows that when you cut wet wood, your blade gets stuck. It's not a belief, right? Because it's an experiential, I can't cut this wood. Blade's getting stuck. I know I can't cut this wood because I just tried and the blade gets stuck. I don't believe that the blade can get stuck. I know. As opposed to somebody who read a book that said that the blade gets stuck if the wood is wet, right? But they're not sure what wet wood really means because they read it in a book. It's an abstract. So when you're outside of that triangle, Cosmic, are you in the sphere of knowledge as opposed to belief?
That's a good example.
I would say so, yes, because here's the thing. When I talk about these certain spheres, it's not just an intellectual belief, right? Because when you believe in nihilism, it's not just that you have an intellectual inclination that things are devoid of meaning. The universe will then shape itself and reflect itself to, you know, go with that belief. Because if you think about like synchronicity, for example, a lot of people think that when you get, you know, synchronicities and you get all these signs and it, you know, all these coincidences happen, that it's proof that the divine is speaking to you. Well, in a way, it's almost like, when you're like a nihilist person, it's almost like you get negative synchronicities. You get all these bad, unfortunate things happening to you, and it's almost like that's a synchronicity that proves that God doesn't exist. It's almost like it's an inverse synchronicity, if you will. So it's like so when you are in nihilism, it's not just that you intellectually apprehend that's the world is. You feel the despair, you feel the hopelessness, you feel the endless massive fields of darkness just going around you, and pessimism and suffering and meaninglessness. But that's the thing, that's an experience that you can have, and there's a truth in that experience. But the transcendental is also a true experience. There is also interconnection, there is also love, there is also spirituality. Both of these modes of experience are available to be experienced by us, and we can choose to, you know, kind of go with either one. But what I'm trying to do with my project is, what if I perceive both of these worldviews simultaneously and allow both of them to exist at once? Because in a way, one other thing that I kind of realized about belief system is that every belief system has some kernel of truth to it. It has some kind of half truth that pulls you into the religion. Otherwise, I don't think the ideology would be effective at being manipulative if there isn't some truth to put it together. So you think about this, like, I mean, obviously with the belief system, there's the psyops, there's the lies, there's the manipulation tactics, there's all the deceptive gaslighting and, you know, manipulative whatever. We all know about that. But I think that little sliver of truth is the ribbon that ties the box together. And that I think is an important thing. So when you're able to, because when you're able to see the partial truth in all of the aspects and all these dimensions, then you actually have a better tool, a better sort of frame of reference to remove the parts that don't make sense, the parts that aren't true, right? So that's the way I look at it.
That's an interesting perspective. I love that. I feel like there's always exceptions to things, and by studying like the Babylonian mystery schools, I learned that they also use truth like as a bait. They'll use a small truth to lure people in that's substanceless, that doesn't provide any understanding or wisdom, and then push dogma onto people and have them follow it blindly without being allowed to question anything. So there's that aspect is one interpretation of what it might be, but that might actually point at the individual, how the individual receives it. Because like, even if something is tainted, people can always pull out like a golden thread out of something. There's always like a silver lining in a rain cloud. So, you know, if somebody can find something good in it, whereas other people see all the problems, I think there's value to both sides of the issue. So other people are trying to make it easier for the people to receive and have it changed, and when people are receiving it without questioning it. So I feel like ultimately for the individual, you have to take both of these things into your hands ultimately to be able to go further, because you can have blind obedience on one side and you can have pure skepticism on the other side, and they're kind of driving people away. But when you have the integration of these two, when you listen and then start to question, and you can have a dialogue with people and you're allowed to question things, that's where true understanding really comes in. And I feel like with mysticism, there's a lot of that. But with organized religion, there's really not as much of that, especially in Christianity. Not allowed to question things so much. Partially because people don't really have the answers, but in a lot of ways, they're not really trying to have a dialogue. Because I think maybe they would think that it could lead them astray, since they really don't know what to talk about a lot of times. There's a lot of mystery there. And in Taoism, there's also a lot of mystery, which is the power of it. But I think sometimes the mystery can be seen. Sometimes the mystery can elude the individual. In Taoism, they mention the mystery. In Christianity, they also mention the mystery. So in one way, Taoism's kind of trying to push people out of civilization and institutions back into nature. And Christianity is trying to pull people out of nature into the institutions. But that's not always the case. And you can interpret that as you wish. You know, you have your, there's like been like different branches of Christianity. Like I think the Franciscan monks did things differently and were more connected to like gardening and doing things and making their own wine and things. And so like you can pick and choose between all these different little aspects of things. There's going to be something that resonates with you if you look hard enough. And there's going to be understanding if you really see it and feel it and really kind of like trust your intuition to show you where you can find things. And for me, I've had a hard time having faith with Christianity, and I've come to bring it back into my life and examine it and try to get closer to it and closer to understanding it and having it in my heart. And so I've gained a lot of wisdom from it, but there's still obviously some things that I still question. But I feel like ultimately being able to integrate the questioning and the following can kind of help an individual rise to the top of that pyramid.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. And I just want to point out one thing. Alex, how you doing? Namaste. And I hope you guys are well. And Tiger Lily and all the people that are in the chat and have been joining. I hope you guys are having a super day. Om Shanti. Namo Narayana Shiv Shankar Bhagwan Namah. But you mentioned something interesting, and I've popped it up onto the screen, which is about you needing a license. You mentioned something about getting your Johnson shine. I'm not quite sure what you need that license for, dude. But license to operate a vehicle. I'm just going to put this out there. I'll try and find it, and I'll try and link it into my group. I saw a guy. This guy had his ducks in a line. This guy was together. Oh, wow, he was impressive. He was in court, and he put the police, the judge, and the prosecutor in their place, just by asking questions and producing documents. And he was driving his vehicle without a license, and they pulled him over. And his argument was that you didn't have the right to pull me over because my vehicle's not licensed. And he was using their own stipulates. He was basically quoting their rules at them and saying, does that say this and this and this, true or false? And they have to say, yes, it says that. Then he says, where does it say that you're allowed to pull over a vehicle when it doesn't have a license? I'll have to go and take a look at the law. He says, well, there isn't such a thing. So basically, they looked really stupid because they came there prosecuting him, and he said, listen, according to these documents, which is your laws, you're only allowed to search a vehicle on the road that hasn't been, that license has expired. And that's what it says in Article 2.1.2.3. But nowhere in this document does it say you're allowed to search an unlicensed vehicle, because you're only allowed to administrate licensed vehicles. But since my vehicle wasn't licensed, it doesn't fall into these parameters. And it was incredible to watch the judge squirming in her seat. The prosecutor didn't know. They could not hold him in contempt of court. They could not, because he was polite. The way he handled it, I'll try and find that video of this guy. I watched it maybe about 6 months ago. I was blown away but he did his homework.
Is it
He had
Santos
to go and
Bonacci?
study. Hey?
Is it Santos Bonacci?
No, it wasn't. It was a young African Negro guy
Yeah.
that just knew his crap. Just knew his, like, a highly articulate, intelligent guy. He knew his crap, and he wasn't there to be. He was polite. He was decent, but he just kept quoting the rules at them, and they were like, they couldn't say anything. So he was holding, and he was saying, Your Honor, so this person has come here unprepared for the case, because every question I've asked them, they said they have to go and read about it, but they're supposed to have a case here. What's this case based on? So the case ends up getting thrown out of court because he didn't have his vehicle license, and he was resting upon the fact that he never had his vehicle licensed. So they had no right to apprehend him. They had no right to search his vehicle. They had no right to interfere with him, because they only are lawfully allowed to administrate licensed vehicles if the license has expired. That's according to I don't know what it's like in every state, but that was one state. So my point is, get the actual book, right? The actual statutes of the law, and read them with a fine comb, and look for the loopholes. Because if you can find a loophole, and you can argue that in court, you see, once they bring a case against you and it gets kicked out of court, they can never bring the same case against you again.
That's awesome. Santos Bonacci did a similar thing. He did a lot of research, and he showed that everybody can declare themselves sovereign. If you get yourself a live birth certificate, you're showing yourself as a corporation, and your name has capital first letter and lowercase for the rest of the name. Whereas the other birth certificates with all caps shows all heads, decapitated heads, and you're declaring yourself chattel of a corporation, dead or lost at sea. And so when you have a live birth certificate and you declare yourself sovereign, the state is your trustee. They pay for all of your fees, and you're immune to having to pay for any licensing or any ticketing or any crime punishment. So you cannot. Yeah.
He was filming in court. At first, they didn't want him to film. Then he pointed out this law and that law. about his rights and his right to make a record of what's happening in court. So
Yeah.
I'm going to continue filming unless you stop me. But if you stop me, it will be a breach of this and this right. So then he had the video on, and he had the prosecutor and the witness and the police, and he was filming them, and he was filming the judge, and they had no right to stop him. How is this for incredible? We don't know our rights, and the moment you're filming them, you can put that on YouTube, and they know that you can, right?
Yep.
So, like, it's an interesting perspective if more people go and figure out how to work the system. But anyway, getting back to the topic. That was just something that I remembered that, like, it really blew my mind. This guy really put them in their place, and he was young, man. He was like 25 or 28 or something. I was like so impressed. I was like, dang, man, you got your head screwed on for such a young bloke. Like most of us in our 50s or 40s, whatever, we haven't reached that level of understanding how the system can be worked. But
I just saw a video that was beaten down by like 12 officers just for pulling out his phone and starting to video them. And so somebody videoed that, and they're like, we need to start to question what they're allowed to do for people being videoing somebody. We're allowed to video them when they pull us over. They don't want us to do it, but you can get these mirrors that videos them, and in front of you and behind you and both sides. And on the rear view mirror.
Yeah, and another one I saw was somebody videoing a cop, and the cop wanted, and he kept his window closed. He said, "No, I'm not complying.
Yeah,
I'm videoing you." And the cop got frustrated, and in the end, the cop just drove away and left him because he was compiling too much evidence against the cop. The cop actually reached for his gun, pulled his gun. He said, "Are you threatening me with a gun, officer? Look at my hands. I'm unarmed." He said, "Yeah, but you're videoing." He said, "I'm unarmed. Are you threatening me with a gun?" The cop quickly shut up and put his gun away. He realized he was on video pulling his gun on an unarmed person. And he was putting his hands up in front of the cameras to say, the camera can see that I'm not holding a gun, but you're pointing a gun at me. I'm feeling very threatened by you at the moment. Are you aware that you're making me feel unsafe? And like, the psychology behind dealing with these people, but it's interesting. But yeah, getting back to what we were talking about just a moment ago, this idea of the way in which, ideas and ideologies and belief systems sort of lock us in. I think this is a structure of physicality. I think that without too many ideas about physicality, when we are really young, and I don't know how many of you have spent a lot of time. Namaste, Kasun Lee. How are you doing? Sri Lanka. Ah, nice. I lived in Sri Lanka for a while. Spent quite a while there. So I fell in love with the wilderness in Sri Lanka. Very, very beautiful place. New Age stuff going around, ascension and that etc. We're getting into this. We're getting straight into this. Just flow with us, dear Kasun Lee. So in order to get to that, we're looking at the idea that we get locked into a belief structure, and that belief structure becomes a finite world around us. Now, for those that can remember when they were young, if you've done the work of traveling back in your memory, you can unlock your memories to when you were like a baby. I've unlocked my memories to go back to a number of days out of the hospital, within 1 to 2 weeks out of the hospital, right? And the first thing I remember about those memories are how the physical world doesn't seem to exist in the way that it does. And then as I track my memories, the older I am in my memories, and another thing is when we're that young, we don't think. We don't have any personal mental infrastructure. We don't even have personal emotions. How's that for a concept? The only feelings that we get are like there's these two poles out there. That's what it feels like. You're in this abstract sphere. You can't see properly. You can't hear properly, right? Like everything's blurry and weird, but you can hear two energies, two vibrations, and they're different. The one's mother and the one's father. And those feelings you can feel. And those thoughts you can be aware of, but you don't understand the thinking, but the feelings you can relate to. And when there's an uncomfortable feeling, you cry. When there's a happy feeling, you feel happy. And that's like what you can relate to as like a young child. For those of you that haven't done the work, I would recommend doing some pretty severe memory training, like meditatively going in to learn to relive your day, learn to relive your week in your awareness, traveling backwards, learn to relive the year, traveling backwards, learn to relive the decade, traveling backwards, learn to relive 2 decades, traveling backwards, learn to relive your entire life, traveling backwards, step by step by step, like you're going on a train line. And it's a lot of work, but it's worth doing it. And going to certain locations, you can sort of absorb the memories. It feels like you absorb them from the earth, because like you can tell when there's a block of a memory, but it's like around that place. So you go to that place and you sit and meditate in that place, and you start to absorb whatever it is that's the block out of the earth. That's what it feels like. And then that becomes the memory that you've taken from the earth. So I think our memories live in the earth. I think our ideologies and our belief systems become like a pyramid, like Cosmic showed that image that structures the mind. And the thinking then becomes the parameters of form that constitutes space, because awareness is spatially bound. Perception is form bound. Form structures space, but form is based upon thinking. It's the pingala of the rising current. It's the current of the pillar of form, the pillar of Jabura is the pillar of form. Then you've got the pillar of force, which is the pillar of mercy, pillar of chesed or chedula. And these two pillars represent these two principles: energy, form. And the energy represents feelings and emotions. And the form represents the thinking mechanisms that structure space. And so these two polarities are represented in India as the Ida and the Pingala. They're represented in China as the yin and the yang, right? Yin and the yang. So we always have these sets of polarities. And I think that when we're looking at the thinking mechanisms of the belief systems and the ideologies, that structures space in such a way to produce what we know as form. And that form becomes the prison of reality that we live in. Because reality doesn't have to be a prison. Reality can be whatever you allow it to be. And children are more in tune with their ESP and their psychic spiritual abilities than adults because of this. This is why it's much more natural for children to be able to remote view, to be able to experience communication with beings outside of the body, to be able to get premonitions of the future, to be able to recollect past lives. As children, it's easier. The older we get and the more hoodwinked we get by our belief structures and our ideologies, the harder it gets to exercise ESP. So a big part of developing ESP is destructuring. So like when it comes to that ladder of moving towards, and we're going to get to what you asked us about ascension, by the way, to our Kasun Lee. I think the New Age version of ascension is something which is, to me, very confusing, and it seems deranged to me sometimes, if I'm going to be honest, because it's all about escapism. It's about escaping this world. And I think that this escapism is a natural response of humans because of what you were talking about, Indy, the suffering in this world. We're being challenged by resistance, and resistance is a product of our belief system that has structured space into a particular form, and now we are knocking against that form, and that limitation of that form produces a emotional reaction within us, which we then feel. And we then have these feelings that we imprint upon ourselves as a reaction to the thinking principles that have got us locked into this particular paradigm. For example, when I was younger, I used to forget. I used to accidentally access supernatural abilities without even knowing I was doing it. It was just natural. I would forget that I'm not. And I had to teach myself as a little child not to do it. Then when I was older, I would sometimes also just notice it happening and going like, why is this happening? Right? And I had to learn to recognize that like my reality isn't what I think it is. And I think like maybe because I drowned when I was really little, it destructured my ideology and thoughts and structure of what I think space and form should be. So I always knew that I could do things. I didn't know exactly what I could do, but I always knew I could do things that other people didn't know that they could do. I always knew I could do them, but I wasn't interested in trying to do them. I just knew I could do them. So when I started training in martial arts, I just knew I could access that force and I could use it just naturally. And so, you know, in life, I think our limitations are in our minds. It's like the story of the fleas kept in a small container with a roof put over the container, and they forget how high they can jump, right? Now they live in a world where they can only jump so high, but actually they used to be able to jump that high, but that container got smaller and now they're stuck. I think for us, the container is our ideology. The container is our belief system. I think when we leave our belief systems behind completely, as in dismantle our ideologies, it's a dangerous thing to do. But I think that is one of the primary and fundamental steps towards attainment on the proverbial ladder of Jacob. You know, as a metaphor, we use the Jacob's ladder as a metaphor. But this ladder of ascension, when I speak about ascension, I don't mean escaping physical reality. I mean embracing reality, though embracing reality without a preconceived notion of what reality is. In my mind, that is ascension, because we descend into a very small space of form. But form isn't the subtotal of reality, because force is also. And when we are in a state of balance between force and form, we aren't stuck in one particular ideology of what form represents. And I think form represents the number 4. The ideology, you could look at it on a numerological scale as to represent the number 4. And so the number 4 then becomes like the stagnant structuring segments of law that you use in order to build, the builder's tools, the builder's handiwork. But that number 5 brings the dynamism of Mercury, which is the one that traverses the spiritual and the physical. And getting back to what you were saying from Sri Lanka, yeah, what was your name? Kasun Lee. You know, this ideology of this ascension. They think that ascension is a new remodeled work, or not they, but what I have seen of what has been written and spoken of as this new age concept of ascension. And I'm sure there must be a myriad of versions. But this idea that you're going to be saved by extraterrestrials, or this idea that there's going to be a rapture, or this idea that something's going to come and take you out of this world and leave the world behind, I think that that's a lie. I think we have to transform this world through presence. And this world then gets transformed into the divine world. And I think that is ascension. What are your thoughts on this whole idea, Indy?
Yeah, I think it's all about transformation. And I feel like people are led to be drawn towards like one set of values that are associated with their gender. And we come to a place in mysticism where we can integrate the subtle opposite gender. But like through these two sets of values, it's not that they're not on the same scale as one another. They're just on different sides. But it's through like a non-binary understanding, you can understand that these are just a scale, and that you can choose to take your place on the scale, what's practical, and go with the flow, to be able to have that versatility, to be able to have mastery in your world and to the world around you. So I wanted to go through like some of the different ways that they can lay out the opposition of the values that we see. We see the basic ones like feminine and masculine. In the ancient Chinese understanding, they associated feminine with the butterfly and masculine with the mountain, which are like very different things. But a lot of the different aspects we see are like receptive and like giving, intuitive and logic versus logical, the worrier rather versus the warrior, chaos versus structure, emotive versus rational, rest versus action, passive versus assertive, earth and water elements versus fire and air elements, transforming versus initiating, surrender versus sovereignty, the limbic system versus the prefrontal cortex, pulls energy inward versus projects energy outward, right hemisphere of brain versus left hemisphere of brain, and then the chakras, root, sacral, heart, and third eye versus solar plexus, throat, and crown. Those are some of the different aspect dynamics that we see on the different scales between the sets of values. And so a lot of times people are drawn towards only being limited to one set of values. But obviously, there's more power gained in what's called the coincidentia oppositorium, where we integrate the virtues of either side of the pillars into a containment of both and celebration of the sacred union between them. So that's kind of like one of the steps that we can take in our transformation. And it kind of comes with going through like more initiative steps where you're going to go through overcoming some of the detriments and some of the things that are holding you back. And then you're going to be going into things that are going to be helping you rise up and go to further places. So, learning some of this stuff is really good to draw people into the path because it's kind of very profound and simple in a lot of ways, but it has a lot of virtue in it. Like those 7 principles there of the chakras. Seven and 3. Powerful numbers. And with 3 being like in the Chinese system of Taoism, they have the 3 dantians, which are expanded in the Vedic system with the 7 chakras. But 7 has the 3 within it. If you integrate like the 2 upper together and the 2 lower together, or the 3 and the 3, and then have that center one, it makes for a system of 3. But it's interesting how in that system that Franklin has, he had it so the center one has its own circle of 3 as well. So there's 3 sets of 3 to make 7 in that like Venn diagram set of 3s.
You mean this one, yeah?
Yeah. It's interesting how the numbers work out. 3 sets of 3 making 7.
Yeah, well, that's the enneagram and the septagram coming together,
Yeah, right. That's right.
because like it shows that like memory sits in two places. So the memory exists both in the emotional field and in the spiritual field. Yeah, it reaches both into the emotions. So your emotions can prevent you from remembering, or they can trigger a memory. Yeah. Like it's very often that people are having a catharsis and they remember stuff from their childhood that they had forgotten because of the catharsis, right? Or if you get angry and hyper emotional, you will block yourself from experiencing that being able to recall that memory later. Like example, let's say you have a conversation with someone where you get angry. Go back and try and remember everything that was said in the conversation. It's more difficult. Have a conversation with someone where you stay calm. Go back and remember that conversation. You can remember word for word everything that was said. So the memory is both a barrier and a promoter of, the emotions is both a barrier and a promoter. And then, of course, memory reaches into the spiritual, like to remember the future and the past lives. And, this is the very high and very divine attribute, the memory. And the will as well. The will is very much, it's a very mental thing, because you can mentally choose to direct your will, right? But your will is also directed by your passion. Hypothetical situation. A mother that's afraid because her child is in danger, her will becomes so powerful she can lift a car with one hand. Sheer willpower, right? So the emotions are powerfully connected to the will, but also the will is also controlled by your thinking and your rational, applications, where you can rationally decide, I'm going to choose that, but not that. It's a very rational thing. It's a very mental. So the will and the memory both occupy two slots. So you could say that they're are expressions of, in a way, of duality. And the duality of these 2 points then operate together, right? The memory and the will operate together, in a sense. Like this is the keys to manifestation, I think, that people forget, because they're just thinking about intention all the time. And they forget that tension is regulated by the will and the memory. That tension which produces the structure that intention can flow through, memory and will are both. So if you want to strengthen your intention, chant the idea over and over and over again, because you're more likely to remember it better. And in that increased memory, your will becomes more powerful. And if you really focus all of your mind and all of your willpower onto something, you're much more likely to remember it as well. Right? Like if you sit and focus on what happened last week, Tuesday, and you wipe everything from your mind and you push your will and you're relentless, you can uncover things that you thought you'd forgotten. If you're patient, right? Like that masculine patri, that patience, patience. But it's interesting. Like you bring up the 3 sets of 3 and the 3. What I wanted to point out here was this. So like when we're looking here, we're looking at like the enneagram, right? So these are the 3 sets of 3, essentially the 9, as they are put into context of worldly expression, shall we say. And we can see that like the negative traits of egoism and insensitivity and hypersensitivity and being impressionable and being scattered and overconfident, right? And being stubborn and controlling. I think that is the problem with religion. That number 4, right? That stubborn, controlling element of like, this is the rules, this is how it must be, this is how you behave, this is what you do, this is what you don't do. If you do that, you're excommunicated or you're stoned, right?
Yeah.
Control you. That has been a very big part of our religious ideologies. Then you got the adventurer. What happened to my adventurer? Why is my adventurer? What happened to my adventurer? Very, very strange. Usually I see my images popping up here, but I don't today, which in itself is a bit weird. But yeah, the idea of the adventurer is like, let's see what's going on. Why has why has this become so weirded out? That's strange. For some reason, I didn't put down number 5, but I did, but it shrank. I'm not quite sure why it shrank the way it did. There we go. Oh, maybe I just hadn't written it on this version of it. So number 5 is the adventurer. That is related to new ideas. I think what can come with that could be nervousness. Yeah, as a negative trait. Yeah. Being excessively, what's the word that goes with nervousness? On the one hand, nervousness. On the other hand, flippant, but not flippant. That's not the right word. There's a word for it. When
Aloof? Is the word aloof?
Aloofness is something, but I don't think that's the one I'm thinking about. The idea that when you do something and you like, okay, what should I do? Flip a coin. That's what I'll do. Well, what do you call that?
Impulsive?
Yeah, but not just impulsive. It's like not really impulsive. It's like, yeah, what should I do? Flip a coin.
Oh, fair, kind of.
Yeah. There is a word for it. I can't think of it, but that would relate to that adventurer, right? Being so unformed.
Impetuousness.
Right? Sorry?
Impetuous.
I think that might be a word that governs it. Impetuous means that you don't have a proper responsive way. You're not responsible. Is that right?
Yeah.
Impetuous. I think that is one word. That wasn't the word I was thinking of, but I think that is a synonym for what I was considering.
Quickly without
because,
thought.
yeah, I think that would be one of the words that does reflect that.
Yeah.
Fickle.
Yeah, there you go.
Fickle was the word I was thinking of. But yeah, impetuous and fickle, I think they're quite close to each other, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know, I think they're like sort of synonymical in a way.
Fickle,
but
like changing frequently as regards to loyalties and interests, like kind of moving around a lot.
Yes. And a lack of responsibility and unpredictability, which isn't necessarily positive, because we're looking at the negative sides here, where incoherency and nervousness go with that, right? If that makes sense. Because when you're incoherent and nervous, you don't you don't think what you should do. You just do this, do that, whatever. Doesn't matter. And then, of course, envy and vanity, which is related to number 6. And then aloofness and escapism, which is the negative unbalanced force of number 7. Because 7 is like about being aloof, right? But not necessarily negatively aloof, like the mystic who wants to be a bit of a loner. They want to be at home with their books. They're not interested in going out and socializing. They're interested in knowledge. They're interested in learning. They're interested in going in within themselves. But that can become unbalanced to the point where you're escapist and aloof, right? So aloof, I think, is like a negative context don't know if the word aloof specifically means that, but in this context, being excessively aloof and escapist represents number 7's negative force. Number 8's negative force would be like materialistic and competitive, but in a negative way, right? Everything's about the bottom line. What can I get out of this? What can I get out of this situation? What can I get out of this person? What's in it for me, right? That idea. And competitive to the point of like, I must always end up on top and win, forgetting the compassion. And then, of course, the impulsiveness and the frustration can come from the number 9, Mars. So all of these numbers and all of these planets are typical Western astrology, typical Western numerology, typical Vedic astrology, and typical Vedic numerology. They also relate to the Tao as well. You know, if you really look at it, like number 4 represents stubborn, controlling, that stagnancy. That stagnancy produces not being alive. Number 8, in its positive way, represents the positive harmonies and structuring of the universe, success. So 8 represents success, 4 represents being stuck, 5 represents, in its positive form, the 5 elements. It's the unifying potential of dynamism. It's how yin yang finds its dynamic expression through the 5 elements. And 3, obviously an optimistic number, represents the Tao and yang and yin coming together in the Tao. Very positive Jupiter, which represents joviality. And then we've got 2 and we've got 1, obviously, which represents masculine and feminine potentials. And then we've got number 7 and number 6. I think in Taoism, number 7 isn't considered that lucky. Isn't that interesting? Number 6 is considered more lucky. But that's just like really interesting, you know, the way all these numerological systems fit together. And so this is the Chaldean version of the Enneagram. This isn't the modern version. This is the old pictures from Chaldea. And I've put the numerology and the planetary as they are, like considered astrologically, into context with it so that we can sort of map it and understand the human psyche. So this is quite interesting because when we look at like this notion, right, what we see here is we're looking at the 7 potentials. So we can see here how, you know, will and memory can trap us. You see, isn't this interesting? This is where we're talking about ideology. Are you with us, dear Cosmic?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, just because I know you stepped away for a sandwich or something.
Yeah, I'm back.
You're back. So like this is where I see this is, you know, that pyramid that you were talking about?
Yeah.
I see that pyramid in this sphere here relating to the memory and the will, shaping the imagination in a very particular way to create an ideology, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
you know?
Perfect sense.
So like the will shapes the memory through the use of imagination, and that becomes a belief system. And so we can see the will and the memory as these 2 connecting points. So maybe like the first step is our sensation, right? Is our sense of physical sense. And I think our physical senses are probably the first things that start to change, and they're getting to like the attributes of spiritual awakening. Like with you, Cosmic, first thing you started noticing was that things aren't what they seem to be, right? And next thing, you weren't alone.
Yeah.
Like you thought reality was like this, and then you were like, hold a moment, what am I picking up on here? What am I experiencing? I'm sensing something that's not like what I thought. Reality is not quite what I sensed before. So that sensation is like a whole interesting thing. And then the instinct kicks in, I think, is the next level, where we instinctively start to trust our own inner self, as your journey with the Fae has developed your instinct, hasn't it?
Yeah, of course.
You rested upon the logical framework of what you've read and studied, and then you had this revelation of sensation of experience that made you go, hold on, I need to like learn to like trust my own inner instincts, what's going on inside of me. And the more you started to trust your instincts, the stronger your will became. Yeah. The ability to focus and actually make a connection with the Fae. And with that connection with the Fae, because of the will taming the instincts, right? Being driven by the instincts, but at the same time taming it to get you to that meditative state. So meditation then rests in the will. The imagination flowered openwards. And as the imagination flowered open, you started to get more and more information coming from the Fae. And that is feeding directly from the source of universal consciousness, memory, which isn't your own memory, but it's universal. It's going into the spiritual realm of what we call the Akash, whatever we want to call that, our non-physical reality, that substance which connects all of the realms, all of the different states of being. That started to filter through you, through the Fae, through your connection, and that awakened the intuition. And that intuition being awakened is you channeling this new system, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Like that's all intuitive. There's nothing else to it, really. It's like it's totally an intuitive process. It comes through, and that intuition has now inspired you, right? So you see this, like the steps of these 7 steps, and that inspiration then is going to take you a full circle back to going deeper into the sensation. Yeah, opening up more Xerfaxes, more possible, and then that will make your instincts become even more. And it's like an octave shift of these 7 principles, which are also 9 principles as well, if we consider the will and the memory being binary.
Yeah. Well, I think when it comes to what I've been doing, I think that you kind of talked about part of the equation here. I think there's a kind of a back and forth between intuition and intellect, because it's like you'll have an insight that you intuit, and then you can kind of extrapolate intellectually from that particular intuition. But then when you you explore intellectual ideas, you then say, hold on, there's another thing. There's a new idea that I can meditate on and intuit, and then you intuit something new, which then creates new intellect. So it's this kind of this snowballing effect where these two dynamics kind of like help each other out. And so that's kind of the way I've been sort of looking at it, is sort of like finding a way. Really, it's about bridging a gap between the intellect and the intuition. I feel like a lot of people, like, they seem to be kind of focused on one polarity more than the other. Like some people, they're very, intellectual, and they're not very spiritual. Or some people, they're very spiritual, but they're not very intellectual. In my practice, I want to try to get the best of both worlds and have them work with each other as opposed to working against each other. So, and I think when it comes to I think it's a process of intuiting things that you intake things with your intuition, and then you use your intellect to sort of express it and sort of organize it in a way that it makes it easier for other people to digest and intellectually understand or intuitively understand.
Yeah, I like that. I think like that back and forth is exactly like a very accurate sort of way of looking at the way it works. And just to bring it in for people here, I've got the imagination at the center of this story, which is like the imagination. I'm going to add that when we think about the intellect, I consider the intellect as an expression of the imagination. I know this is going to sound difficult, but you can find this in popularized as well by psychologists and philosophers, because in order to know something, to think about something, to consider something, you got to imagine. But once you imagine a new possibility, then the intellect is intel lecture. So you then have to structure the information of the imagination in order to express it. And so that intellect I see as the vehicle of expression for the imagination. I don't see them as being exactly separate. I see them as being like a yin yang. The one is its fundamental state, and the other one is how it perpetuates that state externally. And the will is the one that is its state, and it perpetuates its state. So it is what it is. The memory is the state, and it's also how it perpetuates that state, which is why the memory and the will are in those two very specific places. Instinct is also expressed as our proclivities, right? So our instinct gets expressed through proclivities as well. Our sensations gets expressed through impressions, right? Impressions is sensations, and our intuition gets expressed through genius. Yeah, any kind of authentic information is genius. That's pure, authentic, and it's fresh, new. Came up with it by yourself. It comes from the intuition. It's expressed as genius, and inspiration is expressed as bliss, if that makes sense. So that pure inspirational state, we express it as a blissful state of being. That's how we translate it in our mind. So just to bring like that, when you talk about the intellect, I see that in the center there as that expression of the imagination, which is dancing between the instinct and the intuition. Yeah. So the instinct awakens you to enter into that imagination. The will is the vehicle, right? The imagination happens in the space of the memory, right? And that space of the memory, it embodies the intuition. And then the intuition feeds through the zone of the memory into the imagination, which is then expressed by the will as an instinct, which we express as a proclivity. And a proclivity, I would also relate it to an idea, which is an interesting concept, as opposed to a very or maybe a specifically structured thought form, shall we say, because our instincts turn into something that we relate to on a deep level because of our imagination, intuition, and inspiration and memory. The human soul matrix consciousness field is quite adept at feeding all the other elements into one element. So within the instinct, we have all the other six operating. Within the imagination, we have all the other six operating. Within the inspiration, we have all the other six. So you could say that there are 7 here, but there are also within each one of those 7. So we've actually got 49 gradations here. Does that make sense when I express it that way?
Yeah.
In other words, maybe I haven't explained it well. You've got the sensation of sensation. Then you've got the sensation of instinct. Then you've got the sensation of will. Then you've got the sensation of imagination, sensation of memory, sensation of intuition, sensation of inspiration. Then you got instinct. Then you got instinct of sensation, instinct of will, instinct of imagination, instinct of... And so each one of those contains a subset in the same way that the tattvas break down the element of earth, for example. Then you've got earth of earth. Then you've got earth of water. Then you've got earth of fire. Then you've got earth of air. Then you've got earth of space. Then you've got water of water. So these elements cross over in the same way when you really like delve deeply into the elemental natures of things. So I think when we start to look at the 7-step ladder, we've got 49 steps. And who of you guys have come up across the 49 gates extensively? I don't know, Cosmic or Indy, if you guys...
I'm not sure what you're talking about.
I don't think so.
The 49 gates of there are 49 elements that represent And there's a treatise, occult treatise on 49 gates. I'll have to go and try and find where it is. It must be in my library somewhere. And what it represents is these sevenfold seven attributes as a different series of steps that moves towards the 50th gate, right? And this is like a notion which is quite powerfully expressed in the Kabbalah, but it's also powerfully expressed in for example, this is why the number 98 is considered sacred, because you've got the 49 gates of the microcosm and the 49 gates of the macrocosm, right? And that meets in 98. This is why there are 98 elements, and the 50th gate is the point of union between these two, which becomes the 99. So this is why, like, Muslims have 99 beads on their rosary that they must chant the name of Allah, for example, because it relates to the structure of the etheric plane as opposed to the structure of the astral plane, where in India they have like 108 beads on their rosary, which they focus through the Guru Dakshina, which is that silent, unnumbered bead, for example. This is why we have this subtle difference. But it's just really interesting when we start to consider these sevenfold, seven attributes. Within the tree of life in the Kabbalah, you have the same teaching. You have the teaching that within each of the Sephirot, you have the shadow elements of all the other Sephirot present, but not active. So, and in India, we have the same idea. Within each of the 7 chakra, you have the shadow elements of all the other chakra present, but not active. And so this is like where the doctrine of the 49 gates is finding its expression. And the 49 gates culminate in the 50th gate. And the 50th gate is composed of 25 divisions. And these are the 25 tattvas. These are the elemental attributions of or what I mentioned earlier, you know, which is a structured system of divination, actually. You can use your breath to divine things. If you've got a piece of glass and you use your breath, you can divine which elemental forces are working together. Or if you know the color spectrum and understand how they work in terms of these different planetary modes, you can go and watch the water where the sun's rising and see the subtle colors in the water changing before your eyes. And you'll notice there's a rhythm to the changing of certain colors. And on certain days, there'll be certain colors that will run in a cycle. And those colors will run in a cycle. And it's this clairvoyant perception that you have with open eyes. But you can also have it if you blow your breath onto a mirror and observe the shapes that your intuition and unconscious start to recognize in your breath on the mirror. And you can detect which elemental natures and energies are prevalent, which you can then map out planetary wise. If you need to do a piece of magic, and let's say that piece of magic is like, let's say hypothetically, it's got to do with Mars activism. So you would need to get iron, right? And you would use iron, you would use the color red. You would use particular foods if you were going to make an offering, right? Iron-rich foods, very important. You would, if you were going to do a dance, you would think of the animals associated with the ram. You might want to make yourself look like a ram, right? Are you with me? And you would be wishing to alter that aspect of your consciousness field to produce a more wholesome form of activism within yourself, which is like the expression of dynamic movement. So you could do like a ritual for any one of these planetary influences. Then you would want to know what energy is prevalent and when's the right time to do that work. You could then use a water to scry using the sun to figure out, or even the moon, to figure out which planetary energies are prevalent at the moment so that you know when's the exact time to do it, because you would have you'd be able to calculate based upon the hours of the day which planetary energies are dominant at that particular time, based upon the time of year where you are, and based upon your 12-hour cycle, which you will have charts for, all of these magical charts. But you would be able to calculate it yourself based upon the astrological wheel, though you wouldn't even need to do that. You could use your intuition to gain that information based upon looking at the elemental cycles, and you'd study the cycles for a while. And when you study the cycles, you'd know what's coming ahead of based upon what's come before and after. And you would document the cycles as you're watching them in order to get the pattern, and then know when the particular energy that you want to connect with is going to be prevalent. And that's when you would do your ritual. Just as an example, like when it comes to doing talismanic magic, for example, you would use these systems. And so trying not to get too lost in the complexity of talismanic magic, because I don't really think it's necessarily fundamentally specifically helpful unless you're creating an amulet which is going to store a particular quality of frequency which you have a deficiency of. But before doing that, you would have to have done the shadow work to recognize the deficiency and recognize what you need to put in to improve your own deficiency, so that you can work with that deficiency and strengthen that part of your character and your persona and your energy field in order to become more balanced and harmonized. So this is like the fundamentals behind the healing arts of talismanic magic and the creation of amulets and various different magical items being created using these magical rites. But getting back, this is based upon these 49 gates, and based upon how with the division of sevenfold seven, within the seven there are this repeating seven, and you'll find the same one within the divisions of the ninefold as well, which is interesting. If you're mapping out your emotional world, there would be 12 divisions within each of the one spheres of the enneagram, and those 12 divisions would represent the 12 aspects of the zodiac, which you would then map out in the 9. This is how an astrological chart in India is created, using a Saturn square. And you would then be able to work out the necessary associations between planetary, numerological, and whatever is associated with that particular house, be it the metal, the gem, the food, the incense. For example, I've been burning frankincense here, right? So that's a very solar thing to be burning. I'm also burning myrrh. Myrrh is a very Saturnian, and I often burn storax. Storax is a mercurial, that's a number 5, the adventurer. So you would use the correct incense, and you would find other incense ingredients that relate to that to burn during that time. So all of these divisions can be calculated, and I think like this is basically ceremonial magic that we're really starting to look at here. And I think that this is possibly one of the things that attracts people when they're starting out on the spiritual path. Am I right? Cosmic, were you attracted to ceremonial magic when you first started out?
I was certainly attracted to the aesthetics of ceremonial magic. I kind of liked all the symbols and all of the course of the complexity of it. I think I lost interest in specific types of ceremonial magic when I kind of really figured out like the finer details and what's actually kind of implied. There's a lot of kind of like extra work that's like, not necessarily necessary to achieve magical results. Like sometimes like you do certain rituals and it's like the deity would contact you before you even finish the ritual. And it's kind of like, oh, you're already here. Okay, never mind then.
Well, this is what I'm getting at. Like, I see this as like a first step that has been created in Western schools, and just coming from the Western egregoric. But like you say, you use it for a while, and then very fast you sort of leave it behind. I think it's meant to be used that way. I don't know, because then you, like you say, you trigger that inner principle of sensation. Once you pierce the veil of sensation, you start operating on another level. Now you're going into the true mystical state of things. So that all of that stuff is just really to prepare the psyche, the body, the consciousness, so that you can hit that sensation point. And once you hit that sensation point, then it becomes its own process. Well, then the 7 Hermetic principles become revealed to us through beings, like you say. And it's really funny because that is such a typical thing. You normally first connect with the being, and then you think you want to do that ceremonial work. And then you realize that at a later stage that you didn't need to go through all that pompy nonsense. Maybe I mustn't call it nonsense. There are a lot of people that stake a lot on it. But, you know, you didn't have to go through all that nomenclature, that just developing the will and the memory are enough. And so that brings us back to the training of the imagination, and that's like meditation. So I think like your first step is learning to structure things. That's like a ceremonial magic is a Western way of doing that. And the second step of that 3x3 process is learning to like concentrate and poise. Like you have to concentrate and poise to make contact with the Fae. And then once you've learned to concentrate and poise your consciousness so that you can open yourself to your sensitivity, then the next sphere happens on its own. And that's the memory and the intuition and the inspiration becoming active, which then inspires you to develop your own system. No? In your case.
I'd say so, yeah. But, you know, this isn't even the first system I tried to develop. I actually tried to develop a system before that, but I didn't really like where it was going. So I kind of like scrapped that project. So, yeah, I think the reason that project initially didn't work well is I think it was a little bit too dry. Like I realized I needed something. It was like purely like psychological and too stripped down. I realized I need some kind of symbols, something color, something tangible to actually work with. And with this, I've been able to kind of like project my mind out much farther into mind space.
Well, it seems like to me that like whether you think you're planning to do it or doing it or not, you end up meditating.
Yeah, like whether you do it intentionally or not.
In order to make that connection, you have to sit and focus your mind, right? And become
mind and body to a certain extent.
Yeah, exactly. And become like really centered. And then you can hear and sense the subtle things. And so that then becomes like I think that's like the next step of development when you leave the other things behind. Because you then realize, well, I didn't actually need all of that. I only needed that to get me to the point that I can do this. Now that I can do this, that's no good to me. And it's like training wheels on your bicycle. How's that for a good
perfect analogy?
Then you don't need the training wheels. You take them off. Okay, well, they were good. I love them, but now I don't like. I'm going to feel silly driving around with training wheels. And then you're riding your bicycle until you're old enough, and you go, maybe it's time for a car. You know.
And well, I think it's the same thing with like, you know, when you think about like intelligence, to kind of like bring it to another parallel between magic, there's people who they know facts, they know bits of information, but they can't come up with a new invention and create something new or come up with some new scientific insight. And likewise with magic, you can read the occult text, you can read the religious scriptures, you can do the rituals as they say in the book. But at the same time, it's like you're not coming up with any new mystical insights. You're not coming up with any, you know, new occult mystical observations about the universe. You're not taking that mystical knowledge, applying it, and making something new with it. And I think that's the test of really, you know, when it comes to magic is, you know, not so much like how many books you've read or how many rituals you've done or how many hours you've meditated, but does that practice actually translate to tangible results into the world? That to me is probably a better marker for, you know, someone being effective at magic or not.
Exactly. And like, you know, how does that shape who you become? And I think that brings us back to what Bernadine's saying here. What was it that Bernadine said? speaking positive, uplifting, loving, understanding words heals us as well as Gaia. I think that's like where it takes us, where we actually start wanting to to make things better, for people, to help people where we can, and we start becoming more conscientious about ourselves. Like when I was young, I couldn't see myself so clearly in terms of, like, let's say relationships. I think relationships is the big one, right? Because when you're in a loving romantic relationship, then you start recognizing that like I can't just put myself first all the time. No, like I've got to put the other person first as well. But I mustn't put them first and put myself last. I must put both of us first. But they must be as first as me. In fact, sometimes more first than me, if they need it more. To that idea of equality and that expression of loving, healing, and then being able to reflect that back at ourselves and go like, oh, maybe I'm being selfish now, and rein ourselves in. Like, this is what I want, but hold on, what do you want? Let's weigh this up. What do I want? What do you want? Let's try and find that Libra scale. Yeah. And I think that becomes the balance and the harmony, and then that automatically moves us to want to express love. What do you guys think? Is that the high, spiritual high, the expression and sharing of love?
It's certainly up there.
Yeah, I think so. I feel like it starts with self-love and then expands to like the sacred union with the perfect complement. But I feel like yeah, some people might take like a different route and like become an ascetic or something, and that's not, it doesn't really say that that's a bad way. That's also a good option.
Yeah, I've noticed the difference between, that there's a writer. His name is Greer. I think it's J.M. Greer. Is it John Michael Greer? Something like that. I could be wrong. Steve Michael Greer? Steve Greer, John Greer. Anyway, he one of the books that he wrote that I loved like many years ago, and I didn't love many books. I mean, it's like 4 decades, 3.5, whatever, decades ago. One of the books that left a big impression on me was his humor in a book called The Paths of Wisdom, 32 Paths of Wisdom, which I used to praise as being one of the best books because it was so humbly written. Yeah.
Mm.
And the humor, I loved the humor. But this guy I think he's written a lot of other books. I mean, I don't read books really much anymore, but one of the ideas that he has expressed is like the differences between occultism and the difference between not asceticism, but mysticism. Yeah. And there are two different forms of mysticism. So the one mysticism is like to do with prayer, right? Just expressing desires and living in faith of everything that happens is what's meant to be. Then another form of occult is got to do with aligning the universe with my will and using my will to purify myself, bring myself into harmony with the universe so that I can drive the universe in the right direction. Always seemed a bit suspicious to me, like the desire for power. And then the third form of mysticism is that path of absorption, going into the path of wisdom. So you could say the path of power, the occult, the path of love, which is like that mystic path of acceptance of the universe and prayer into building a relationship with the fundamental intelligence life behind all things. And then the path of wisdom, which relates to going into deep meditative states and just listening. And in that state of listening, one ends up discovering aspects of oneself and of the universe, other beings, entities, intelligences that are part of the fundamental structure of this dynamic, this being, this universe that we're in, a part of, a reflection of. And so these three parameters of love, power, and wisdom seem to make the 3 points of the triangle, right? And so that's quite an interesting concept, you know. If we think of 3, 6, and 9, yeah, you could say that 9 represents the power to do activity. You could say the 6 represents the beauty and the harmony that produces love, Venus. And you could say that the 3 represents the optimization of things, thought, dynamics, which is wisdom. And so the 3, 6, 9 then becomes an expression of, you know, wisdom, love, and power. So what are your thoughts there with regards to these 3 aspects and with regards to the, you know, moving deeper into communication with the deeper self?
Yeah, I think the wisdom, love, and power. What's that one associated? One of these triangles?
Yeah, I mean, you could think of wisdom as related to the number 3. You could think of 6 relating to harmony, the hexagram. And you can think of 9 relating to the completion of the task, which brings all the power and potential into activity, like Mars. Mars represents that action, power. Jupiter represents wisdom. And Venus represents love. No?
Yeah. So, you said that those are one of the 3 sets of 3: wisdom, love, and power.
Well, I think those are the 3 fundamental states.
Oh, okay.
Then those 3 fundamental states will be reflected in a slightly different paradigm. But I think it is those 3 fundamental things that are reflected 3 times, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, I get you. Yeah, that sounds like a good dynamic to encapsulate human nature. I think, you know, people kind of struggle to go into more than one with that because they kind of go in different directions. And so, but they don't necessarily always do, but they usually do. So, like, for example, um, for one to go into power, you kind of have to really bow down to like a lot of things that are there and serve them to be able to rise up. Whereas the mystic, however, doesn't necessarily bow down to the same institutions, but might bow down to like a wise master instead because they're trying to gain a different type of power, the power of heart and mind. And so it's like a journey of like self-discovery and mastery that doesn't really take one into like governing over others at first, but then it might give them a role to like lead as a shaman to like provide guidance to others after gaining such mastery. So there is like travel between the various paths that one can go through. And oftentimes people may travel down one and then drop it and then switch to another in their life journey. I've seen this happen with people that were priests and then went a different direction and dropped out of the church, or vice versa. So it's interesting to see. Some people just drop out of like society and become ascetic after, you know, going through like a challenging time or just kind of losing their passion with things, you know. But I think it's interesting how it can draw us into different directions kind of divisively. And I feel like artsy people are more like on the left side of the scale when it comes to like wisdom and love. And people that are more concerned with like materialism and stuff and like financial gain is like a strong, important aspect. Usually drawn more towards power, away from wisdom and love. But there's like loving everything, you know, with power that's it can be more scarce, you know, people can be more stern and not necessarily in a good place for themselves. They're really oftentimes in a place of power have a lot of responsibility to look over others and can oftentimes lose track of their own personal issues and stuff.
Yeah, while you were talking, you challenged me to look at the other three triangles, and I'm looking at them now, and I'm seeing the associations. I find that this is the best diagram of the tree of life that I've ever come across. I can't believe that I didn't figure out that this was the tree of life like 20, 30 years ago. My gosh, it would have been so cool. You know, I spent too much time looking at like other ideas of trees of life when this is the perfect tree of life. So you can map it so beautifully. So you could see like 9 as being Mars as action. Action represents the use of power. 3 as wisdom represents the pinnacle of thought potential, Jupiter. It's that expansiveness of mind. And 6 as the harmony that is produced by beauty, which is Venus, music, love. So you can see 6, 9, 3 becomes love, power, wisdom, right? Then when we shift the triangle towards the left, right, then we see that 1 becomes its own expression of love, like the sun, expressing the power and life force of the sun, which is pure love. It's the soul of the world. The soul is the substance of life. The substance of life is the substance of love, and that life substance is light, and that light substance makes love to the leaves on the tree, which produces the sugar that keeps us alive. And so it drives the system of life because love is the source of life. Then 4 represents power, because 4 has got to do with the structure and the control, right? The builder is using the power of 9 in order to build something. Yeah, the action, the activity. So 4 is very much about activity and the structure of building and relates to 9 in that shadowy way. Then wisdom, the mystic, the 7 is about going inside and discovering personal truth, and where personal truth touches universal truth. That is wisdom. So we can see that paradigm then of love, power, wisdom, 1, 4, 7, as opposed to love, 6, power, 9, wisdom, 3. So 6, 9, 3, 1, 4, 7. Then we go to the next triangle that shifts to the next point, and then we've got the empathy. The empathy, the moon, has got to do with the love, that giving birth, that sacrifice of the self, life and death, the mother's womb, represents love in the physical world, because nobody loves a child the way a mother. That moon's energy is all about the progenitor. And so we could then see the workaholic, number 8, Saturn, represents power once again, right? Because Saturn is the occult power. So the occult power is Saturn, which is understanding how things work and being able to use that power in order to achieve success, worldly, financial, material success. It's an expression of power, number 8. Number 2 then represents love, as it's that empathy that brings about compassion, and compassion is the vehicle through which love finds its expression. And number 5, the adventurer, is Mercury. Mercury is all about the mind and learning, right? Once again, wisdom. Hence, like Virgo is all about studying and learning and teaching. And Gemini is all about communicating and sharing ideas, to share information. And that's how wisdom gets propagated. So you can then see this triangle is love, wisdom, or love, power, and wisdom. And so you can see all three of those triangles are expressions of love, power, and wisdom, but in a different way. So the 2 represents the womb, the place where love comes from, and that sacrifice of the mother, right? The 1, as a harbinger of love, represents the expression of that love. So this is the expressive triangle, and this is the impressive triangle. And then the 9 represents the principle. You could see that triangle as being the fundamental triangle. So you've got the fundamental triangle of 9, 3, and 6. And then you've got the expressive triangle of 1, 4, and 7. And then you've got that taking in to produce the substance triangle of 2, 5, and 8, where the substance is coming into a culmination, where 8 becomes the perfect vehicle of the expression of power for the sake of power, where 9 is the expression of power for the sake of transformation, and for the sake of, Scorpio being Mars's feminine pole, the death card of the tarot, and also the agent of that expression in the tarot that we would see as the emperor, because the emperor is he holds the power, and the transformative is how the power is expressed. That's number 9. So you can see how these 3 triangles sort of repeat those 3. You gave me a wonderful little thing to think about, yeah, brother. Thank you.
Welcome. Yeah, there's also actually a grouping of 3 between the Enneagrams from 1 to 5 being competency between 1 and 5. And then there's an overlap. Reactive starts at 4 and goes to 8. And then positive outlook overlaps and goes to 7, from 7 to 2. And so I find it interesting that like certain ones have an overlap that integrate 2 different ones. And then there's other ones that only have one aspect. So for example, like number 3 is only competency. Number 6 is only reactive. And number 9 is only positive outlook. Whereas all the others have 2 aspects. It's an interesting layout.
Yeah, 9 is such an interesting energy, isn't it? The vibration of 9.
Yeah.
And it represents like that activity. So it represents the spring equinox, not equinox, the spring solstice. Yeah, Aries, which is the baby goat, the ram, where you see its connection with number 8, because they're the ram, and then you've got the goat for Saturn. So you've got that very interesting place where you've got the those 2 horned creatures in the same wheel of the zodiac, one in Capricorn and one in Aries. And Capricorn is winter, right? And Aries is spring. So that's sort of showing us to do with like life. Like spring is when you're getting all the good stuff, the abundance, like berries, flowers, bees, nice weather. And then you get your cold harshness in Capricorn, right? Because Capricorn then goes like from what? Like end of December into end of January, right? If you're living in a cold climate, that's when it's going to count to have good heating. Yeah. So it's very much about materialism and looking out for the physicality. But 9 represents the abundance of spring. No? Yeah. So what is wrong with spring? Is there anything wrong about spring? I think spring has got to be like the best time of the year. It's not too hot. Summer can be too hot, can be dry. You can have problems. Winter can be too cold, can be icy. You can have problems. Spring's just perfect, and it's a time of abundance as well.
Yeah,
The birds, yeah.
The new year used to start in April, on April 1st, which is why they call it April Fools on April 1st. Because before, I guess, in the Roman times, they switched it over to the winter because people were more mopey in the winter time. They needed more cheering up, so they changed the holidays to the winter time. That's the reasoning that is explained. But also they have Saturnalia that they had in the winter time, which I think is what they're trying to cover up there. Celebration.
I think they wanted us to celebrate Saturnalia without knowing we were celebrating it.
Exactly.
And for us to stop celebrating spring.
Yeah.
It's like, isn't that the time you should be celebrating? So it's like really interesting when you look at like the way they've hoodwinked us. But yeah, so getting onto this ladder. So these three principles seem to be fundamental. The one principle of going up the ladder, the other principle of going down the ladder, and then the other principle of being on the ladder. That's an interesting concept, And so it represents time in a way, doesn't it? I mean, I'm trying really hard not to get the Saturn square and the Saturn sigil out here, but like, how do you ever have a conversation about the occult without getting out the Saturn square and the Saturn sigil? Think about it. Like, it's no wonder Saturn was so worshipped, right? No wonder the black cube has had such a huge, powerful impact in the world and shaped so much of our philosophies and concepts, and why we see these cubes represented and this expression. Yeah, Bernadine, it's a great story not told, hey? Namaste, Beck. How are you doing? Hope you're good. Is Turjurka here? Why didn't I see Turjurka? Is Beck Turjurka? Are you one and the same? Well, namaste, Beck. Hope you're having a good time. Hope you're enjoying. You're in Ireland, so it's probably starting to get a little bit fresh. Ireland must be. No, I think it's still warm out there. Am I right? You're still getting the last of the warm weather, because like I was speaking to people where they were getting warm weather. Where was it? A little while ago, and they were like on the tail end of their winter, so it must be fairly warm in. Okay, cool. Well, namaste, Beck. Hope you're well. Am I right? Is it quite temperate and warm for this time of year in Ireland? I'm just curious. I have to know. Well, yes, exactly. 25 degrees is warm, man. Am I right or wrong? That's like severely warm for this time of year, considering that it's like, it's the end of, coming towards the end of August. Normally by now, August, September, it starts to cool down, doesn't it? To 22, 23. Anyway, hope you guys are all having an absolutely namaste, Don Country Balls, Mexico. Don Country Balls, Mexico. Don Country Balls, Mexico. That's an interesting name. I'm not quite sure who I'm talking to, but big love. Yeah, so I think, like, when it comes to these aspirations of these fundamental 7 principles of Hermes, and just to bring this back up again here, I equate inspiration to the principle of mentalism, intuition to the principle of correspondence, vibration to the element of memory, polarity to the element of imagination, rhythm to the principle of will, cause and effect to the principle of instinct mitigating effects and causes, and generation, the generative potential of masculine and feminine coming together, producing the field of sensation, which is the physical body. So the physical body, sensation, cause and effect, the instinctual body, the expression of raw currents driving us. It does also hold our desire body in there. So it's an expression through which the desire body finds its expression, hence relates to this Svadhisthana chakra. The will obviously is related to the expression of number 8, number Saturn. These deep instincts move us towards action, an expression of Mars, an expression of number 9. Sensation, which has got to do with sensitivity, is expression of the number 2. Will is an interesting one. That's the Saturn one, expression of the number 8. When we look here as well, I think there's double fold that's going to happen, and the imagination, like I relate that to the element of the number 1, for example. Memory, which is quite interesting, relating to the number 6, the structure that keeps our consciousness, the hexagram, the Merkaba, the Akashic field, Venus, the gateway to the mysteries, and the intuition as the binary potential of mercurial energy, which is able to traverse the entire tree. So this is just how I relate it. You should find your own way of understanding it. So the intuition thus becomes the expression of higher mental function, and inspiration as the sphere of jovial impressions and expressions of Jupiter, which is that expansiveness of consciousness. And so the pure inspiration is what like leads us and brings wisdom, is what inspires us, and inspiration produces wisdom when it moves like a lightning bolt through the tree, or through the the ladder. So I see this as a ladder with 7 rungs in it. It's just a way of considering it. And then the element of memory and the element of will, I see will as being carrying the shadow of number 4 in it as well, because 4 finds its perfect expression through the number 8. And memory being that place where we go into ourselves very deeply. So that's the pure element of the mystic. So apart from being the number 6, it's also the number 7. So memory holds 6 and 7, which holds the vibration, and rhythm holds 4 and 8, which is the structuring of the physical universe. And the rhythm is what structures the vibration. And so the will is what gives expression and form to the memory. So I see these as a structure. Cosmic, what about your ideas? What's your Jacob's ladder? Is it going to be
my
a big
Jacob's ladder?
Yeah, go it at us.
I guess I could show you my equivalent of the Jacob's ladder. Let me pull up one of my diagrams. I think you've probably seen this one at some point. Yeah. All right. Screen. All right. And here we go. So basically, I guess you could say this guide right here is my Jacob's ladder. But that discovery that I discovered recently was that, like, I guess apparently if you go to like a different Zarfex's form, these colors are arranged like in a different order. So it's like sort of slightly one over to the left. So it would be like pink, red, orange, yellow, green, and I guess because of that, there's like a whole different like way of like layout in terms of how this stuff. Anyway, the idea is in this system is that this triangle right here, this is the ultimate sort of self. This is the higher self. This is being, and on the left side you have being, which is sort of like your inner feelings. And then you have awareness, which is an outward projection. And so this is kind of like a non-linear kind of ladder. So the idea is you want to get to the center from both sides, kind of like converging in. And so basically the way it works is like there's being and there's awareness. But as awareness touch being becomes infused with awareness. So as each color gets slow, so you start off in pure being in black, but as you keep going further towards here, you get slightly higher and higher levels of awareness with each sort of color gradation. Like, so basically you have like something that's like, so basically the way I think about this is like, this is red represents math, information, numbers. Orange represents energy, waveforms. Yellow represents sort of like physical objects and shapes. And green sort of represents organic, biological matter. And you can see that there's a kind of a progression. But the way the progression actually works is you bounce back and forth. So basically, so you start out with red, then you go over to pink, then you bounce back to orange, then you bounce the other back into purple, then yellow, indigo, green, blue, until you kind of get to the equilibrium point at the center. So really, I would say there is a kind of a ladder, but I think that my system, cosmologically speaking, is a lot more horizontal than it is vertical, although there is a vertical dimension when I'm dealing with extra dimensional stuff. But that's essentially kind of the idea, is when you kind of like find your individual stuff. Then you want to develop the next level. It's like there's like a saturated layer on top, and then you kind of like go through the same process again of sort of saturating all 8 of these frequencies, right? But I kind of want to show you guys something that that I found kind of interesting, that I've been kind of just playing around with. So, like I was talking about the rainbow thing earlier, and it's different colors, right? So I just kind of like mapped them out in a simple way like this. So where I put up the star right here, this is where our color spectrum is. So we start off with red, and then we go to orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, right? But what you do is when you go to the next one, you just kind of shift it one down. So now it starts at orange and then ends at pink. And so my discovery, so these two graphs are 2 different things. So this one on the left is where all 8 of the colors in this Fey magic system are, included. So you have like the complete frequency when you go to red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, pink, and then you cycle back to red. So it goes back to the stuff you're talking about, Franklin, about, things being octaves, like a kind of a note going from sort of one scale registry sort of to the other. But this diagram over here, notice that the top layer is covered in black. Now this represents the, because we live in the solid Zarfex, that this kind of represents sort of the black barrier or the black membrane that kind of prevents us from perceiving the outer Zarfex. So for so each one of these columns right here is the color spectrum of a different Zarfex. And the one that I have for a star, that's the one that represents ours. So for our Zarfex, the secret hidden color is pink. And I was actually, with the Kabbalah, I had an interesting insight. What if Da'ath is actually pink? Now hear me out, right? Because Da'ath in Kabbalah is considered a hidden sphere, and it's supposedly not really a true sphere, so to speak, right? Well, that's the same thing with the color pink. Pink is, according to science, not technically a true color. It doesn't have its own sort of wavelength. It's actually a weird color. So in a sense, they're both, when you think about pink and Da'ath, they're both things that, according to conventional society, are said not to exist. So I think that the color, that Da'ath, is the secret pink sphere of the Kabbalah. What do you think of that, Franklin?
That's a really interesting. Can you bring up the image that you put up first? The first image that you put up of the horizontal ladder, if I can call it that, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at this here, and let me make it bigger so that I can see it clearly. It's me, old eyes. Gotta look clearly. So I'm seeing this. I'm getting a very interesting perspective here.
Uh-huh.
Like I'm almost seeing it like from our perspective. We are. You said red. Red. What did you say? Red represents
Red?
Aiko.
Ajo.
Ajo.
Ajo. So basically, red is kind of like it's an intellectual. It represents mathematics, information.
Right.
Basically, it's the consciousness of information, if that makes any sense.
And Ritzlithu.
Ritzlithu. So I can pronounce all these. So it's Ajo, Sheu, Plenizo, Cathanio, Rislithiu, Bevitha, Vithuzitho, Zethizithu.
Oh,
Fun sounding language.
So what does Rislithio represent?
Rislithiu is kind of like direct awareness. So green, if you think about it, is the awareness of like touch and like physical touch, smell, feeling. Rislithiu is like the awareness of eye contact, the awareness of someone directly speaking to you. It's the awareness of another person's awareness, if that makes any sense. I'm still trying to figure out what all these colors mean, but that's basically kind of where I'm at the moment. But Rislithiu is sort of like the first. So basically, this is kind of like physical, like touch, and this is more kind of like perceptual outward awareness. That's like there's an awareness that's infused with being, and this is being that is infused with awareness. And as you go further to the left, it becomes more pure being, more kind of unconscious states of mind that has less awareness. And on the right side, you have more awareness and less being. So, for example, when you were talking about the flotation tank earlier, and you said that you basically lost all sensations of your physical body. Well, in that sense, it's basically, from that perspective, you don't have any green awareness, but you have an excess of like blue and indigo awareness, for example. So when one is kind of like subtracted, the other is kind of reinforced and sort of like intensified, if you will.
Okay, so the reason I'm asking you this is to get back to your question about Dwarf and pink. I think there's definitely a correlation here. I'm going to tell you what I'm seeing.
Okay.
So I'm seeing the self in the center. Then I'm seeing one polarity onion level around the self, which is your Cathedrio and your Restudio. Excuse my pronunciation.
All right.
Then I'm seeing above that Sinethio. Is that right?
The orange one?
Yellow.
Oh, yellow. That's Clinizo.
Oh, it's an L. Clinidio.
Yeah.
Clinizo. I'm seeing that, and Bozia. I want to say this in like a Russian or weird kind of accent. When you write the way you write, it makes me think of like
it's kind of meant to use your imagination when you pronounce it. That's kind of the point. It's supposed to kind of like when you look at it, you're supposed to be confounded.
Bothusia.
Which color?
Indigo.
That's Bavitha.
Baditha. So I see that as a polarity with yellow.
Yep, that's
the
true.
Next onion layer.
They correspond in that way. So basically, green and blue correspond with each other. Yellow and indigo work together. Orange and purple and red and pink. They all have relationships with each other in that way. Because they're the opposite. They're the sort of the masculine, feminine counterparts of each other, if that makes any sense. And they sort of bounce off of each other in terms of being and awareness.
Then I'm seeing this relation between the violets and the orange as being the next outer sheath.
Yes.
And then I'm seeing the red pink thing. Now, when I think of pink, I think of red, I think of like Mars. Right. And I think of number 9. But what we see on the Enneagram is that 9 goes through the center of nothingness. Right? And in that center of nothingness, there's just pure light. So when red goes through a center of pure light, it's going to get white added to it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And when you add white to red, you're going to end up with pink.
Mm-hmm.
So pink is like the next octave of 9.
I think a lot, but also it's
That's like
interesting.
dark represents that inner thing that you travel through. So the process of red traveling through dark, it emerges as pink.
Yeah.
It's like dark is a filter that turns red into pink. And it makes perfect sense because pink and red are so, like, I don't think of them as separate colors. I just think of them as separate octaves of the same expression. Because cathesio, is that right?
Cathadio. So it's like audio, but with a cuff. Cuff audio.
Cathadio.
Mm-hmm.
What does that represent?
That's organic awareness. So that's like, so it's green. So it's like plants. It's bodily consciousness, touch, taste, physical sexuality, that sort of stuff.
Right. So that's like, that's really interesting, the polarities, because then Mars represents that as the passion, and the passion of cause and effect, and the desires. Yeah. People don't realize it, but Mars is a very sexy planet. Yeah,
I can see that.
Everybody thinks of Venus as being like, no, Mars is really sexy, man. Like Mars is like direct action. It's all about action. So the idea of Mars is you express your love through action. And when a man and a woman express their love through action, it's making love. Where Venus is all like, let's hold each other and let's love each other, and it will lead to that physical. Right. Mars is like, let's get the deed done. You know, do it. So, but that's really interesting, that relationship with pink and red and dark. I think there's something to that. And then pink represents, typically as we know it, love, doesn't it? And so you could see how the awareness of organic life would be producing love, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Like you love your family when you hug them and you feel that oxytocin. So pink is related to oxytocin, isn't it?
I didn't make that observation, but all right, I'll accept it for now.
And oxytocin is related to love. You know, the mother, the connection with the child, the husband and the wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, whatever. That oxytocin, you hold her in your arms and you feel that love so strongly. The same as like when you hold your child in your arms, you know, you feel very protective. And like, I'll never forget when I first held my little boy in my arms, you know, that feeling, which is like, I must have been tripping on like mega oxytocin.
Yeah.
But that's beautiful. I love that. I love that. And I love that it's on the outer sphere as well. The outer sphere between the divine masculine and feminine. And that these two, the red and the pink, are touching the masculine and the feminine. Yeah. And that's sort of like the space between spaces, if that makes sense, which I think was what Darth represents, is that the outer zone, if that makes sense.
I think pink as a very kind of like otherworldly kind of color too. Like I'm thinking about like the movie From Beyond, where they create this machine that allows them to see into these higher dimensional spaces. And when the machine is turned on, like everything is bathed in this glowing, eerie pink light. So I think there's something very kind of like alien about the color pink. So to me, pink kind of represents like going beyond the next threshold. So yeah, I guess now that I think about it, I think the Doth connection makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think that's something to consider, because then it gives you that expression. And it's interesting how what you've got here is like you've got 9 potentials, right? Running through here. And you could think of this as, I can see this as vertical steps, even though it's horizontally placed. Where does that sound? It's like if you make your 2 feet touch red and pink, and then you make your 2 feet touch purple and orange, and each time your feet get closer together, you're going up.
Well, and I think another thing to consider about this this diagram is, yeah, you could integrate it in a vertical manner by kind of flipping it on a 90-degree angle. But what's interesting is that you could start from pink and go all the way to red, and that can be your journey. Or you can start at red and go all the way to pink, and that can be a completely different journey, spiritually, kind of understanding all the different frequencies of yourself and how they sort of relate to the Zarfex that we're ultimately connected to. And yeah.
You know how I'm seeing it?
How?
I'm seeing it like this. Like you fold it upwards around the self.
Yeah, I can also kind of think of it like
those are the ladder, and those are the steps.
Yeah, or you could think of it like sort of like maybe it's like a three-dimensional, like the middle is like the pyramid, and the left and right are kind of like downward ramps or upward ramps, like a valley or a pyramid or something like that, where it's almost like if you think of like a V-shaped like a V-shaped channel, and the water kind of flows from the top sides to the portion at the bottom in the middle towards the self, and you can kind of look at it in that way too. There's a kind of gravity that kind of folds into the center of the diagram, and they're sort of coming in from both sides.
That's really interesting, man. Yeah, that's what I saw when I looked at it. I saw the self in the center at the bottom, and then the blue and the green is like one step up, the yellow and the purple is the next step up, and the red and the pink is that step up towards like infinity, or a more infinite sort of
yeah.
I don't know what I did, but anyway. Oh, you took it away. Okay.
Yeah,
cool.
I figured I thought you were done with it.
No, I was just trying to get us all to see where Indy. What happened to Indy? Are you with us, dear brother? What are your thoughts, dear brother?
All right, I'll bring it back up again.
Yeah, I love the associations with Da'ath being kind of a mysterious thing. I also associate Da'ath with the inner eye. But I see you have indigo here is like the next one up. Is that right?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's interesting. So, like, obviously, you have more than 7, right?
It's 8 total.
That's interesting. I love that. It kind of snuck its way in, like, kind of around the inner eye, which.
Well, 7 though, if you consider that pink and red is that mystical. Same, pink and red is the one thing, and pink becomes dark, then it's removed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's like when you remove Da'ath from the equation, it becomes 7 colors instead of 8. That's what's interesting. It's like Da'ath it's almost like the way I see it. It's like Da'ath is like eclipsing or obscuring the pink, and you think it's just black. But then when you remove the black layer away, you realize like, oh, there's like a pink center at the center of this.
It also makes me think of how. Go ahead.
No. After you, brother.
It also makes me think of how the blue throat chakra is associated with Mercury, but it doesn't like really feel like spot on for me. But I do know like it's all about communication. But I feel like it's interesting that like we have like the moon sometimes representing the heart chakra, but I think Venus is a better representation. And if you can have 2 at 1, Venus and the moon go well together. But I feel like there's like there's a part there that where there's missing some kind of mystical aspect. And I feel like this one stripe that you have with like black on the bottom and white on the top kind of encapsulates that right there, because it's like a meeting of like the truth in like the throat chakra with like the heart, which is like compassion to me, and they like meet together in the middle with like kind of like service and wisdom and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's like a perfect thing right there. I love it.
And notice too, like I also have these circles sort of there. So it's like you already have all the 4 colors sort of embodied within yourself. That's what these additional 4 colored circles basically represents. So you have access to all the consciousness frequencies. Because I feel like in a lot of ways with most normal people, it's like people will tend to just kind of specialize in one type of frequency, one type of consciousness, and sort of neglect all the others. Like, like for example, someone who's like more of like an atheist materialist type, they might be kind of like purely like red consciousness, purely ajo kind of consciousness, where somebody who's maybe, they focus on theater and they're just over dramatic and they're just kind of like, whatever, maybe they're more bavitha in their temperament. But the idea is you want to have a good helping of all 8 of the frequencies to truly sort of like develop. And it seems like the way like everybody kind of has like a starting frequency that they kind of like, because these are like, I kind of have to like explore these a bit more. And what's interesting thing about this system is like, the whole thing, I started with channeling this stuff. I just came up with the letters in the alphabet. And then from there, all this stuff just kind of like extrapolates from it. Like you're just sort of like, you're like, that thing where it's like, I'm trying to think like where you have like a, somebody swallow, like a clown swallows like a ribbon and you keep pulling it out and there's just more and more of that ribbon or whatever, like hose that keeps coming out and it just never stops. It's almost kind of like that in a way. But yeah, there's a lot of cool applications I've been coming up with exploring this stuff. Just got to say.
I also like that one symbol we were talking about encapsulates the black on the bottom and the white on the top.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of brings in like kind of like the integration of like the battle between the light and the dark, kind of like bringing the light into the dark, and like kind of has a lot to it that brings a lot of profound power just to the visual aspect of it. So kind of simple, but it carries a lot with it.
Oh yeah, definitely, man. Thanks. Where's Franklin at? He's taking his kid to bed or something.
Yeah, I think so.
But I don't know. It's an interesting idea of exploring like this, like, pink as an occult color, because like it's not really in the chakra system. It's not really in the Kabbalah. It's not really in a lot of other magical systems. I can't even like in the Eastern stuff, I don't really see. Like, Indy, do you know of any other like occult magical systems that uses specifically the color pink? There's probably some.
Yeah.
There has to be something out there, right?
Yeah, they use pink in the chakra system sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
When they have more than 7 chakras.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I know they do that sometimes where they have that like extra chakra on top.
Yeah, so there's various like extended chakra systems. But let's see where they put it at. I think they put pink right here as the galactic chakra, which is you go from the crown chakra to the soul star, to the spirit star, to the universe, to the galactic. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 up from the crown. So that'd be like the 11th chakra. It's the master number. And pink used to be like the color for boys, which is kind of a reduced red. It's like the masculine, like aggression red at the child level. And then they kind of switched it like from the 20s to 40s. They switched it around. And now it's kind of a girly color. But it's definitely a color that we associate with like care and love. It's like a Valentine's Day color. So it's definitely, we associate pink with like affection. And so I think there's like a strong association there as well with pink. Romance color.
Yeah, that's very interesting. The whole idea of pink, I think pink stimulates your circulation and it activates your heart activates your heart center. And I've got this little guy climbing on top of me. Yeah, okay. He's trying to tell me something. He's wagging his little tail. He's all over me. Are you feeling cute? Eh? Feeling cute? Okay. Yeah, so the pink is like, if you think of rose quartz, it's very, very powerful healing for the physical body, right? And for your emotional body, and for your heart chakra, and for your circulation. And I think it's also removes the blockages. So, for example, somebody who has strokes and stuff, or potential, right? A good stone for them to have around is like rose quartz, pink. So it's a very powerful stone. I've got a very beautiful rose quartz egg. Like, people don't know about it. Okay, so I'll share something about like stones. Like, we should do a whole round table on just gems. I can talk for like an hour just on the mathematics of quartz structure, but rose quartz, I've got a star, what is called a star quartz. Now, a star quartz has got to do with different aluminium and different elements within the actual quartz itself, which means that whichever way you hold it, if you hold it outside in the sunlight, yeah, it makes a 6-pointed star on the quartz. And as you move the quartz around, that 6-pointed star will follow the sun around on the quartz. And selenite has got some of this effect happening in selenite that makes selenite the way it is, but it's not the same. So it's very rare. So if you've got a star gem, Westerners don't understand it, but it's very valuable because they so if you've got a ruby and that ruby's got a star that moves around, so this is something for you, that for those of you that are ever buying gems, go into a gem shop and look under a bright light, hold all the gems, and the one that has a little star on it, that's the one you take, because those are the most valuable and powerful gems. If you find a gem with a star that moves on it, a quartz, any gem, it could be rubies, it could be opals. In India, that gem would now, because it's got a star with it on it, be worth like 5 times the price, maybe 3 times the price, maybe 10 times the price. Depends on the star, depends on the gem quality. The better the quality of the gem, and the more increase of the value, because stars are rare to find on gems. So I found this huge egg. It's a rose quartz egg, and because it's a star rose quartz, it's highly valuable. And I got it from the scratch patch in where did I get that? I think I got that in the waterfront in Cape Town years ago, the scratch patch. And I picked it up and I said to them, this is a star gem. And the people who are the mineralogists there, they didn't understand what that meant, right? I said, like how much is it? What was that? I said, seriously, this is a star gem. Is that what it's worth? Well, I'm letting you know it's a star gem, but I'll buy for what it's worth. Now, if I took that gem, that egg to India, and I cut it, right? I could cut it into 40 pieces or 20 pieces, and each piece, I could cut it and polish it, and I could sell it for like more than what I paid for the entire one. Do you understand what I mean? So it's worth 10 to 20 times the value of what it is that I paid for it, because it's got that star on it. But in the West, they don't understand this. They only understand this in India, because our Western appreciation of gems is very limited compared to in India. They understand the mystical side of things. So anyway, this pink rose quartz, if you can find a really powerful iridescent rose quartz, it's one of the most powerful healing stones that there is. I mean, I've got this stone, which is really beautiful. This is a double terminate golden healer. Very powerful healing stone. You can like look at it, and this is not just a double terminate, but it's got a flat crystal growing on it, growing at different angles to it. If you see it, I don't know if you can see it very well maybe you can't see it when it gets close, because it's but anyway, golden healers are also very powerful healing stones. But the rose quartz, if you can find an iridescent one, they are the most prominently and the most powerful for clearing any blockages in your blood system. So there's some interesting connection there with rose quartz and your blood. Interesting, food for thought. And then relating to Mars, and the red color, blood. No accident. There are no accidents in the natural kingdom. So we're getting to 3 hours and 45 minutes. And I was thinking to ask you guys, what are your last sort of ideas that you haven't put on Cosmic Indie that you'd like to share that you haven't shared as of yet?
As one journeys towards self-mastery and through the process of self-discovery and self-knowledge, I feel like it can really help to come into a place of, it's easier for people that go to a place where they're like at rock bottom and they have to give up and surrender and start anew, or have like a near-death experience and just want to like start everything over. But, everybody can kind of like strive towards having an aspect of this. You don't have to do the whole full journey to be able to get like some wisdom from this aspect of, yourself within. And so I think that's a powerful part of what we talked about today, that there's differences amongst us, but we all have elements of those other differences within us as well. So it's good to keep that in mind, and that can bring us together more. Thanks, guys.
What about you, Cosmic?
I feel like I talked about everything I wanted to talk about today, honestly. So yeah, it was good one today.
You got no pranks up your sleeve?
Not at the moment. I'm saving them for later.
I always expect Cosmic to have a prank up the sleeve.
No,
yeah, man, I think that's so on point what you said, Indy. Play on words on your cosmic pranksterisms. I think what you're saying is true.
Mm-hmm.
I think like really everything is so much simpler than what we give it credit for. Like when I think of it as like just becoming like a child again, and just feeling that Namaste Mexico. Oh, I hope you are good. Hope you have had a lovely evening. How's everything at home? I hope it's good. And only a pleasure, oh Tiger Lily. Only a pleasure, and Vincent. And I like to think of Vincent as invincible. How's that, Vincent? That's your nickname. Invincible. The FBI couldn't get him. The CIA couldn't touch him. He was invincible. And Beck, lovely to meet you. And Old Tuition, big love, big blessings. Don Country Balls, Mexico, galactic views. I like it. And Bernadine, as always, big love, big blessings. And SOA, love that you're here. You share a lot of interesting links. I'll say that much. Don't know if I'm going to look up all those verses. There's probably something in them. And to everybody else that's been here, sending you all big love and big blessings. I hope you guys got what you came for. Hope you enjoyed the show. And Om Namah Shivaya. Big love, big blessings. Catch you guys on the rerun. Don't forget to smile, because like it's just about enjoying the moment. All of the mystical and the occult tradition and the meditation and everything, I think, my opinion, is about teaching us to just be completely present and enjoy the moment as fully as we can, because we've been so conditioned and indoctrinated into carrying so much frontal nonsense in our brains and in our minds that keeps us divided and separated from each other and from ourselves and from this world, to the point that we're afraid of nature, afraid. They want to get rid of the baboons where I live. I'm fighting. I'm starting fires in my community, and like, I want petitions signed. We've got to take this to the top, because they are going to shoot the baboons where I live, and that cannot be allowed. So, compassion. What would a child do if a child had the choice? Would they want to see baboons being hurt? It's such a small thing, isn't it? But it's such a big thing. Getting back to our roots, back to nature, back to beauty, back to enjoying the little things in life. When you sit down and you look at a little insect and it's walking across your path, and you observe its little legs and it's doing its little crinkly thing. As a child, that was such a fascination. So by picking up that insect and watching it and really connecting with it and watching it do its little thing, we can re-engage with our childhood. And I think that's really what this whole spiritual attainment is, being able to become fully present. And you're right, Tiger Lily. It's atrocious. If you guys have seen, there's like the videos I share on my channel in Telegram, at Bush Whisperer Speaks. There's my son and myself walking through the troop of the baboons, and the alpha is right next to me on the rock. He's the alpha male. They're planning to get rid of him in this coming week. So, I'm going to go on the mountain and try and see if I can spot where they're hiding parcels of food that's been drugged to make them incapacitated, so they can just shoot them, because baboons aren't that easy to shoot. So anyway, yeah. Be yourself, be true, be real, dig deep down for the dignity of the inner child. Let the inner child release the true you, so you can become more than you were, but less than you ought to be. We think we ought to be so much more than what we are, but it's when we become the small little child inside our hearts that we are bigger than life. Big love, big blessings to all of you. Have an absolutely fantasticular day. Om Namah Shivaya.
You have a fantasticular day as well, Franklin and Indy.
Thank you.
Big
Bless-
love. Big bless.